Chapter 5: Lightning Sword and Roronoa Zoro. I want to see who this Roronoa Zoro is, and who knows, maybe I'll be able to recruit him into my crew, Luffy said as they walked through town. Koby began pleading with Luffy to find someone else as soon as he said that. Luffy, seriously, you're insane if you think getting this guy to join you is the right thing to do, a terrified Koby said. Luffy just spoke with an uncaring expression on his face. Well, since you said he's been captured, that means I can set him free, and whether he joins or not is up to him, Luffy explained as he approached one of the locals. Luffy turned to the man and inquired, are they really keeping that Zoro guy here? Everyone who was close enough to hear the question jumped back with a look of pure horror on their face the moment Zoro's name left his mouth. I'll take that as a yes, Luffy said before walking away, followed by Koby and Nami. Perhaps we shouldn't mention the name Zoro here, Koby said quietly to Luffy. Let's just go to the base. You said you wanted to be a marine, right? Luffy asked as they continued walking towards the marine base. Of course I do, Luffy, Koby said, but I don't feel ready just yet. From what I've heard, the man in charge of this base is named Captain Morgan. Everyone within hearing distance of Morgan's name jumped back and gave a horrified expression, similar to how Zoro's name elicited a response. Luffy and Nami's eyes narrowed as they watched this, and Luffy thought to himself. It appears this is one of those marine bases, Luffy reflected. Nami, on the other hand, found it strange. She didn't have a positive impression of marines in general, but seeing people fearful was a bad sign, especially because it reminded her of her own village. Luffy looked over to Koby, who had a puzzled expression on his face. He then turned to face Luffy and began speaking. I mean, I understand them being afraid of Zoro and all, but why a marine captain? Koby wondered. Before speaking, Luffy's face took on a more sympathetic expression as he looked at Koby. You will learn that in the world we live in, you cannot believe everything you are told, you must be able to see the world for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Grandpa always said that not all pirates are bad, and not all marines are good. He dislikes criminals, but he told me, sometimes a good man wears the suit of a criminal, and sometimes a criminal wears the suit of justice, Luffy said, quoting his grandfather. Remember Koby, power can turn good people bad, Nami said, surprising Koby, who looked like he didn't want to believe what had just been told to him. Nami had to agree with Luffy's point of view, and she wondered who his grandfather was to know so much about the world. Looking at Luffy, she remembered what he had said to her the night before. Which way do you want to go? Luffy inquired. The moon had risen in the sky, the only sound of the night being the sound of small waves crashing against the boat. Koby was sleeping peacefully, while Nami was still awake, keeping her guard up despite knowing she couldn't do much against someone like Luffy. She simply said, I need to go to Orange Town, because she was stuck here and there was no harm in telling him, and she hadn't forgotten how Luffy had saved her life from the cannonball. Why? Let's just say I have to find something, Nami explained. You must be an expert navigator if you know where you're going. Luffy inquired, his hat in his right hand, his interest piqued. I'm not just any navigator, I'm the best, she nearly exclaimed before realizing Koby was fast asleep. Amazing, join my crew, Luffy said as he leaned in closer to her, causing her to back away slightly. Nami yelled at him, pointing a finger at him, hell no, I hate pirates. Be my Nakama. As my Nakama, I will protect you, even from pirates who have harmed you, Luffy stated earnestly. Nami was taken aback by his words, but she remained silent despite a glimmer of hope in her mind. Why do you hold the hat like that? She inquired, shifting the conversation's focus to the hat. It can't be that valuable, she reasoned, knowing that a straw hat didn't have much berry value. This is my prize, my most valuable possession. This was given to me by a man important to me, he said, holding the hat against his chest and flashing a smile that Nami seemed to like. Luffy noticed something out of the corner of his eye as they walked and looked to the left to see a man tied to a post in the open courtyard. Luffy smiled to himself. Koby was about to say something to Luffy when Luffy turned left and began walking along the walls until he suddenly stopped in front of one of the walls and began climbing it, causing Koby to panic and scream at Luffy. Luffy! What exactly are you up to? You'll be noticed, yelled a panicked Kobe, and Nomi wanted to tell him to relax. So, there you are, Mr. Pirate Hunter, Luffy said as he looked at the man strapped to the cross. Kobe turned pale and peered over the fence, hoping Luffy was mistaken for someone else, but one look at the man told Kobe he was the pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro. Nomi had to admit that he appeared intimidating, but the way he was dressed, not to mention the fact that he was clearly tired and hungry, reminded Nomi that one should not judge a person by their appearance, especially someone like Luffy. Zoro was a muscular young man of average height with lightly tanned skin and green hair, 3 identical gold earrings on his left earlobe, and a green bandana tied around his head. He wore black trousers tucked inside black boots, a plain white shirt with 3 undone buttons at the collar, and his green haramaki. "You 3 are an eyesore," he said, drawing their attention. "Get lost," he said coldly, causing Kobe to scream and Luffy to look bored. Kobe said to Luffy, "Luffy, let us just get out of here," but he was ignored, and then the 3 of them heard something hit the side of the wall to their left. Luffy could only stare at the girl as she threw a rope over the wall and climbed over. The little girl then ran towards Zoro with a huge smile on her face. Despite not knowing Luffy for a long time, Nomi remembered him saying that a pirate should help people in need, so Nomi believed Luffy would not just stay put if the girl was truly in danger. The girl then approached Zoro, who did not appear pleased to see her. "What are you doing here?" "Get lost," he said to the little girl in a harsh voice, trying to scare her, but she just smiled. "I figured you were getting hungry by now." As she looked at Zoro, she said, "So, I made you a couple of rice balls. Do you want to die, kid?" "Scram," he said to her, but she didn't seem to want to move an inch. "However, you haven't eaten anything during your confinement." "I never really made them before," she said as she held up 2 rice balls, "but I did my best, so I think they're fine," she said, trying to persuade Zoro to take the rice balls. "Listen, kid, I don't want to eat. Now get lost and stop bothering me," Zoro yelled at the girl. The little girl's smile vanished for the first time, replaced by a frown, just as she was about to say something. But she started, but Zoro cut her off. "Don't make me kick your behind, little girl." Nomi was about to tell Zoro to be kinder to the girl when the gates of the marine base began to open, and 3 figures could be seen entering. "No one likes a bully," the man in the middle of 2 marines said, "but you seem to be handling this well, Roronoa Zoro. Don't you think so?" Kobe breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the marines were on their way to save the girl, but Nomi didn't like the way the blonde man was walking or looking at them. "Looky here, some tasty rice balls," said the man in the middle as he snatched one of the little girl's rice balls. Luffy narrowed his eyes at the group that had just entered the base. "No way. That's not for you." The little girl screamed at the man as he bit down on the rice ball, making a disgusted face. "Ugh! It's far too sweet. There's a lot of sugar in it. You should add salt." The man screamed at the little girl, who looked as if her heart had been broken just moments before. "But I thought it would taste better sweet," the little girl lamented, as the man snatched the other rice ball from her and tossed it on the floor, causing the little girl to cry. Kobe yelled at the jerks, "They're Marines. Why are they acting like that? It appears that you have not read the notice that was posted today by my father. Anyone caught assisting a criminal in any way will be put to death," the man said, causing the little girl to flinch when he mentioned Morgan's name. He chuckled at her reaction before continuing, "It seems even you know my father's name." "So, he's Captain Morgan's son," Luffy muttered quietly enough for Kobe and Nomi to hear. Nomi took a close stance next to Kobe, while Luffy took a step back. "Since you're only a little girl, throw her over the fence," he said, smirking as he looked down at the paled girl. Nomi and Kobe's eyes widened. "But sir, she's only..." "Are you trying to disobey me? Do I need to call father?" he yelled at the Marine, who paused for a moment before gently grabbing the crying girl in his arms. Before throwing the girl over the fence, the Marine whispered, "Just tuck into a ball, it should minimize the damage." Nomi dashed after her, hoping to catch her before she was hurt. Luffy suddenly vanished before he caught her in mid-flight and safely landed with her in his arms, the little girl smiling at him. Kobe rushed over to Luffy and the little girl said, "Wow, thank you, mister. Why don't you take this little girl home with you, Kobe?" "There's something I need to do," Luffy said solemnly as he transformed into lightning and vanished. Nami, Kobe, and the girl all walked away, but the orange-haired girl couldn't help but admire Luffy's actions. Not all pirates are like that. She remembered his words and couldn't help but think that not all pirates were trash like that monster. When lightning struck the ground and the man who had been on the fence earlier appeared in the spot where the lightning had struck, Zoro, who was still tied to the cross, was startled, and all he could do was stare at the man with eyes the size of dinner plates. "How did you do that?" Zoro inquired. Luffy maintained a solemn expression before grinning as usual as he spoke. "I ate a devil fruit," Luffy explained, and Zoro nodded to indicate that he understood. He had heard of devil fruits but had never believed they existed. Zoro then gave Luffy a serious look before speaking. "So, what exactly are you looking for?" he inquired. "Do you want to be set free?" Luffy suggested. "I can easily do that. I won't need a knife or sword for that." Zoro scoffed. "Take care of your own business." Zoro screamed, making Luffy sigh. "If you stay like this for a few more days, you'll starve. I'll come back later to ask again." "Wait, hold on," he said, drawing Luffy's attention back to the situation. "Could you pick that up for me?" he inquired, his gaze falling on the crushed rice balls on the ground. Luffy looked at him as if he were insane. "Are you going to eat it?" "It's mostly mud," Luffy said as he bent down and picked up the squished rice ball, prompting Zoro to yell at him. "Shut up and hand it over to me." "Now," he yelled, and Luffy picked up the muddy rice ball and fed it to him. After Zoro finished eating the muddy rice ball, he looked Luffy in the eyes and said, "Tell the little girl they were delicious." Luffy smiled at him, knowing Zoro would make an excellent nakama. At the restaurant. "Did he really eat it all?" The girl beamed with delight. "He did, Rika," Luffy confirmed with a nod. "He told me to tell you it was delicious, the best thing he'd ever eaten." "I don't get it," Kobe pondered as he sat next to Luffy at the bar. "Isn't he supposed to be some kind of monster?" "No. Big Brother Zoro is really nice." Rika screamed right in his face, causing the pudgy pinkette to jerk backwards from the young girl. "He had done nothing wrong." "Then why is he chained?" Nami inquired from her seat on Luffy's opposite side. "It's because of me," Rika explained, her eyes welling up with tears. "That jerk Helmeppo had a wolf that he used to terrorize the town. It came here with him to Mom's restaurant and started scaring all the customers," she exclaimed angrily. "Before Big Brother Zoro sliced it up, it was about to attack me. Helmeppo, on the other hand, told him he'd have me and Mommy executed for it if he didn't make a deal with him." "That's terrible," exclaimed Kobe. "Why aren't the Marines doing anything about it?" Nami exclaimed. "Everyone is afraid of him because he's Captain Morgan's son," Rika said, tears streaming down her face. "Big Brother Zoro is starving out there because he saved me. Even while tied up, that stupid onion head punches and kicks Zoro. Morgan irritates me. He's a tyrant. But no one is brave enough to confront him." Suddenly, the door slammed open, revealing the blonde scumbag himself. "I'm so hungry," Helmeppo sneered at Rika's mother. "You got that? We're eating here for free. Please hurry up and bring me some booze. What is taking you so long?" Before opening his mouth again, he took a look around the restaurant. "Oh, and because I'm bored, I've decided to execute Zoro tomorrow," he exclaimed. "Look forward to it, everyone." He burst out laughing. Luffy had enough of the blonder's hat by this point, and he stood up, his hat shading his eyes. "Luffy?" Nami inquired, trembling, knowing full well what he was about to do. Luffy stalked up to Helmeppo's laughing form and slammed his fist into the blonde's face. Helmeppo's head warped around Luffy's fist, and the rest of his body lifted clean off his chair before crashing through the wall and landing in a heap in the street in front of the restaurant. The other customers inside the restaurant stared at him in disbelief as the pirate grabbed both of the Marines with Helmeppo. "Who the hell are you? Don't you?" Luffy growled at the sniveling blonde, "You're trash, nothing more." "Captain Morgan, and I'm his son. I'll have you executed for this," Helmeppo managed to say through the swelling in his face and jaw. "You better run back to Daddy before I punch you again," Luffy said, threatening to make Helmeppo flinch in fear. The blonde's marine bodyguards groaned and picked up Helmeppo before returning to the base. "You know you just made that scene you were trying to avoid," Nami said as she approached Luffy. "Now the base is probably going to be on high alert. How am I supposed to get what I came for now?" she wondered. "Is that what you're looking for in the base? I'll assist you in obtaining it. I kinda want to meet this Captain Morgan and punch him in the face as well," Luffy grinned, causing Nami to sigh and smile. "I'll hold you accountable." With a grin, Nami asked, "Just make a good distraction for me." "Later." "You again? What are you looking for?" Zoro inquired, and Luffy began walking forward until he was only a few feet away before speaking. "That idiot's son was never planning on following through on his end of the deal," Luffy said, surprising Zoro. "He was going to have you executed tomorrow." Zoro's eyes widened and he began thrashing and yelling. "What a sniveling little jerk! When I get my hands on him, he'll wish his daddy had flushed him down the toilet like he should have," he yelled. Luffy chuckled before continuing. "By the way, when I heard he was going to execute you tomorrow, I knocked a few teeth down his throat," Luffy said with a grin. "So, there's a good chance your execution was moved up to today," Luffy said, widening Zoro's eyes even more. "Untie me so I can kick that jerk in the nuts," he screamed, making Luffy laugh once more. "This is where my offer comes in. I can untie you and let you live, but you'll have to join my crew," Luffy said, making Zoro pause for a moment before responding. "What crew are you talking about?" he inquired. "I'm assembling a pirate crew, and I'm looking for people to join." "So, what is your response?" Luffy inquired, and Zoro remained silent for a moment before responding. "Listen, that idiot's son stole my swords. If you can recover them, I'll join your crew," Zoro said, making Luffy smile before transforming into lightning and teleporting away. Every Marine on the base could be seen raising a massive stone statue of Captain Morgan, while the captain in charge of the Marine base, Axe-Hand Morgan, stood off to the side looking at his men working. Morgan was a tall, muscular man with blonde hair and a steel jaw, his right hand replaced by a massive steel axe, the handle of which seemed to go right through his forearm, and he wore a large, billowing coat like a cape. Behind Morgan lay the crying form of his son, Helmeppo. "Now, men, stand it up. Show off my brilliance to the rest of the world." Morgan yelled at his men, and as the Marines were pulling the giant statue upright, a bolt of lightning struck the statue's center, widening everyone's eyes. Just when everyone thought things couldn't get any stranger, there was Luffy standing in the spot where the lightning had struck, staring at everyone. "What am I standing on, this god-awful thing? No one will miss something this ugly," Luffy said as he raised his right leg in the air and coated it with armament haki before stomping his leg on the statue, causing every Marine present to start sweating. At first, nothing appeared to have happened, causing a few Marines to breathe a sigh of relief, but 5 seconds later, the entire statue suddenly crumbled to dust, leaving Morgan shaking with rage before yelling, "Death to him!" When everyone looked at the spot where Luffy was standing, they saw that he had vanished and was now standing by the door with Helmeppo. "I need you to show me where Zoro's swords are," Luffy said as he walked through the doors of the Marine base, Helmeppo slung over his shoulders as if he didn't have a care in the world. "They are in my room," Helmeppo said. "It's the door on your left." As they stood in front of the door, Luffy kicked it open and tossed Helmeppo inside, then sent a wave of Conqueror's haki at him, knocking him out. Luffy took a look around the room and immediately noticed how girly it was. The walls were pink, the furniture was pink with flowers on it, and everything about it said it belonged to a girl. Luffy initially believed Helmeppo had misled him and taken him to the wrong room, but when he saw the 3 swords braced against the wall, he knew he was in the right place, so he grabbed the swords and looked out the window, where he saw something that made his eyes widen. A terrified Kobe and Nomi, who had a knife in her hand, stood in the courtyard where Zoro was being held captive, trying to free Zoro surrounded by Marines and Morgan himself. As the Marines prepared to fire on Zoro, Nomi, and Kobe, Luffy flung open the window and instantly transformed into lightning before teleporting to the courtyard. Luffy appeared in front of Kobe, Nomi, and Zoro with his usual lightning strike, putting Kobe, Nomi, and Zoro at ease for a moment while startling the Marines. "The kid with the straw hat! Fire at him!" Morgan yelled at his men, and Luffy immediately wrapped himself in armament haki and waited for the guns to fire. He didn't have to wait long because, seconds after Morgan gave the order, every Marine with a gun pulled the trigger. What happened next stunned everyone. The bullets that were fired at Luffy hit him, but did no damage. They simply squished to the ground as if they had hit a metal wall. "That won't work on me," Luffy said, his eyes cold as a killer as he stared at them. "Can you tell me who you are?" Zoro asked, his eyes the size of dinner plates. Luffy turned him around and cut him free with one of Zoro's swords before speaking. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy," Luffy said as he handed the swords to Zoro, "and I'm going to be king of the pirates." Morgan gave his men new orders before Zoro could say anything to Luffy. "Use your swords if bullets don't work." As he said that, all the Marines drew their swords and charged Luffy, Zoro, and Kobe. Before they could reach them, Zoro intercepted them, holding off each of their swords with all three of his. Luffy was taken aback by the fact that Zoro was wielding 3 swords. Zoro held 2 katanas in his hands, and the third katana he placed in his mouth. "Make one move and you die," Zoro said to the Marines, causing a few of them to cry, before turning his attention back to Luffy and saying, "Today I officially became a criminal because I fought against the Marines. So, I can assure you that I will become a pirate, but there is one thing I want you to know. I dedicate myself to achieving my ambition while I am with you." "Which one is it?" Luffy asked. Zoro smiled and spoke with a lot of determination when Luffy asked. "To become the greatest swordsman in the world and nothing less," he said, smiling at Luffy before responding. "The king of the pirates would have no less on his crew," Luffy said. "What are you waiting for, men? Go ahead and kill them." Morgan yelled, and his men all backed away from Zoro, allowing him to stand before speaking in a terrified tone. "Sir, we're not going to be able to beat them," one Marine said. "They're monsters," said someone else. "If we face them, we will only die," yelled another Marine. Morgan trembled with rage. "Every Marine who is spouting weakness, pull out your gun and shoot yourself in the head. This is a direct order," Morgan yelled. Luffy initially thought he was crazy for giving such an order because no one would be stupid enough to obey it, but Luffy was surprised when the Marines actually raised their guns to shoot themselves. "They are a bunch of idiots," Luffy thought to himself as he watched the Marines raise their guns to shoot themselves. Luffy quickly fired a controlled blast of Conqueror's Haki at the Marines, knocking them out and leaving them foaming at the mouth. Morgan quickly caught himself and swallowed his fear before speaking. "A leader who cares so little for the lives of his own men is nothing but scum," Luffy said in a tone that sent shivers up Morgan's spine. They were scumbags. In this world, power and titles are all that matters. That's something a knucklehead like you would never comprehend. Morgan yelled as he charged towards Luffy, but he abruptly came to a halt. Luffy's right arm had turned to lightning, and a bolt of lightning flew towards Morgan's chest. Zoro had expected the man to be electrocuted, but the bolt of lightning pierced his chest like butter, taking the shape of a sword made of lightning. Morgan collapsed to his knees before spitting a large amount of blood leaking from his mouth, eyes, and ears before falling to the ground, dead. Instead of trying to exact revenge on Luffy as he had expected, the Marine soldiers who were unconscious on the ground began to regain consciousness as he walked back towards them, and when they saw the body of their dead captain on the ground, they began cheering and thanking Luffy for freeing them from Morgan's reign. "It appears they were all afraid of Morgan before we showed up," Kobe said, drawing Luffy's attention. However, just as he was about to respond, he heard something hit the ground next to him, and when he turned to see what it was, he saw his first mate passed out on the ground. Well, we'd better get him some food, Luffy said as he picked up Zoro and slung him over his shoulder before heading to Rika's bar, closely followed by Nami, who was grinning at what Luffy had done, grateful that he had saved her life for the second time. Later. Oh my goodness, I'm stuffed. Having not eaten in 3 weeks, I was ready to munch down on my bootstraps, Zoro said as he sat at the table with an empty plate in front of him, eliciting laughter from Rika, Nami, and her mother. Zoro then turned to Luffy and asked, "So, how many others have you gathered for this crew besides me?" Luffy couldn't help but smile at his first mate's antics. Zoro looked at Luffy as if he were insane when he replied, "Just you and maybe Nami." "So you, the witch, and I constitute a pirate crew?" Zoro inquired. "Who are you referring to as a witch?" Nami shrieked with sharp teeth, but Zoro ignored her. "Don't worry, we'll have more members soon," says Luffy. A group of Marines entered the bar just as Zoro was about to say something, and looked at Luffy, who didn't seem bothered by their presence. "Hey, you guys over there, we heard you're pirates. Is there any truth to this rumor?" a Marine who Luffy assumed was the highest-ranking officer on the base said. Before taking a bite of meat, Luffy replied, "Yes, we are. We appreciate everything you did to save our town from that dreadful tyrant who terrorized us for so long, but now that we know you're pirates, we can't stand by and watch you do your thing. As a result, you and your crew will need to leave town immediately, and we will not report you to headquarters out of respect for what you have done," said the Marine, prompting protests outside. Luffy then raised his hand, commanding everyone to be quiet before speaking. "That's fine, everyone, we were planning on leaving anyway," Luffy said before reaching into his coat and pulling out a transponder snail, which he placed on the table before dialing a number. The snail rang for about 10 seconds before someone picked up. "Hello," a man on the other end of the transponder snail said, and Luffy replied with a smile. "Does this belong to Vice Admiral Garp?" Luffy said, widening the eyes of every Marine and civilian to the size of dinner plates. "This is him." "Who is this person?" Garp inquired, and Luffy replied with a smile. "Your grandson," Luffy said, causing everyone's jaws to drop, which he chuckled at. "Luffy! You brat, how are you doing? Have you started yet? Don't tell me your boat sank," Garp said, causing Luffy to roll his eyes and respond. "Anyway, I called because I knew you always wanted me to join the Marines," Luffy said with a smile that made Garp chuckle. "However, I found a replacement for you," Luffy said, his eyes widening as he looked at Kobe. "Oh, and who is this replacement, exactly?" Garp inquired, his interest piqued. "There's a kid named Kobe," Luffy said. "I think you'll like him. He's a little weak and a coward, but I think you'll like him." Garp sighed and replied after about 30 seconds of silence. "I'll take him, and just watch as he kicks your ass up and down the Grand Line when I'm done with him," Garp said, causing Luffy to chuckle. "He is in Shell's Town in the East Blue. By the way, Shell's Town is going to need a new Marine captain. I had to kick Morgan's ass. Let's just say, he wore the wrong uniform," Luffy said. Everyone got confused except Nami, who understood the hidden meaning behind it. "Very well, Luffy," said a growl on the other end of the line. "Well, Gramps, I've got to go. I'm sure we'll run into each other soon, so until then," Luffy said, making Garp laugh. "Take care of yourself, brat," Garp said as he hung up the phone. Luffy stood up and walked over to Kobe, placing the snail back in his coat. "You can fulfill your dream now," Luffy said. Turning to Zoro and Nami, he said, "Get your things, we are leaving." Zoro grabbed his swords and stood up to leave. Nami didn't have anything to carry since her things were safe back at the boat. Luffy then turned to the Marines and said, "Take care of Kobe until my grandfather shows up, will you?" as he, Nami, and Zoro began walking out the door. The Marines could only nod in agreement. Zoro was dissatisfied with the boat. "Well, Captain, where do we go from here?" As he set his swords down in the boat, Zoro inquired. "We need to find a treasure in Orange Town," Luffy said, with Nami suddenly having berry eyes. Chapter 6, Buggy the Clown. After an hour had passed since they left the town, Nami turned to Luffy with an angry look. "Why didn't you tell us that your grandfather is Garp, the hero of the Marines?" Nami demanded. Zoro just raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask," Luffy simply said as if it were the most normal answer. "What do you mean we didn't ask? Did you expect us to just simply ask something like that?" Nami screamed with shark teeth. Luffy just laughed at her reaction before Zoro decided to ask something he wanted to know. "Oi, Luffy, what was that thing you did back at the Marine base?" Zoro asked, his right eye open while his left eye was closed. "What I did at the Marine base and in that house was something called Haki. It's basically weaponizing your soul into fighting spirit, intimidation, or presence. The presence part is called observation Haki. I used that to stop all of the bullets in the execution yard. It lets you sense anything that is too far away to see or is unable to be seen, like if it's behind something. When it's mastered, though, you can use it to sense movements right before they're made," Luffy explained. "Before you ask, yes, it can be trained, along with one more." Zoro grinned in excitement before getting a curious look in his eyes. "What about the other one that can be trained?" he asked his straw-hatted captain. "The other trainable one is called Armament Haki. This one is like putting on invisible armor, or putting on visible armaments for offense. You can imbue this into weapons like your swords there." He nodded at Zoro's swords on his waist, "and by doing this, you can bypass devil fruit defenses and increase the strength of your attacks," Luffy explained. "What about the other one?" "Those two don't sound like what you used before," Zoro said curiously. "The third one is the rarest and the strongest if you can master it. It's called Conqueror's Haki, and only 1 in a million are born with it. When it's used, you're using your willpower as a weapon. When I used it at the Marine base, I overpowered the wills of the Marines there, though it was a weak pulse. I had to use a weaker wave, which is really hard to concentrate on," he explained again. 1 in a million, who? Zoro mused to himself. "Do you think I might have that?" he asked Luffy in genuine curiosity. Luffy just shrugged in response. "Now, since we will eventually go to the Grand Line, we need to work on your Haki," Luffy said, gaining the attention of his crew. Nami shuddered at the thought while Zoro smirked, prepared to train, no matter how hard it might be. "How will we do that?" Nami asked, slightly nervous about what Luffy had in store for them. Instead of answering, Luffy just grinned before he pointed a finger at her. Before she could ask what he was trying to do, she felt an attack coming, but before she could think where it was coming from, she felt a sudden shock across her body. It was harmless. "What was that?" She screeched at him with sharp teeth. "In order to train your observation Haki, you need to start by trying to dodge attacks. My grandpa used a bat when it came to me, but since that would be overkill, I will use a harmless amount of voltage," he explained, before he pointed at Zoro and did the same. Just like Nami, Zoro too was struck by the voltage. Nami protested that they should try other ways. "This is the only way. First is observation, and then we will start with Armament Haki," Luffy explained. That day, Luffy enjoyed the whole day shocking his nakama. Nami was sure he was doing this on purpose and secretly enjoying it more than he should. But soon, their practice showed progress, with Nami finally dodging her first attack, and Zoro dodging his third. "That's my nakama. Tomorrow we will start Armament Haki, and then spend each day training both observation and armament," Luffy stated, grinning proudly at his nakama. Zoro smirked, looking forward to training his armament, while Nami was breathing heavily but still felt a tingle of pride that she was finally able to dodge an attack. After 1 week, they soon reached Orange Town. It had been a week now since they started their training. Zoro had shown the most promise when it came to Armament Haki from training with Luffy and meditating. Nami had shown talent for observation Haki, having reached the point of being able to dodge 5 times in a row. Once they reached the town, the trio noticed immediately the lack of people around them. It looked almost like a ghost town. Nami knew what could have caused this. "I heard Buggy the Clown is here. Do you think he did this?" Zoro asked, knowing what pirates could do to people. If he did, then I will tear his body apart, Luffy growled in a dark tone that took both Zoro and Nami aback. They knew Luffy as a cheerful guy, but this tone sent shivers through both of their bodies, reminding them that Luffy was much stronger than them. They started walking through the town, and a heavy silence fell over them like a violent river. Unable to handle the silence, Nami spoke up. Luffy, this is how most pirates are. Not everyone is like you, Nami stated, knowing by now that Luffy was not a monster. I know. These people paint everyone else with a bad color. These pirates know they're nothing compared to an actual pirate from the Grand Line, so instead they come here to make themselves feel stronger, Luffy said, his eyes covered in shadows by his hat. Zoro nodded in understanding. He had hunted down many pirates and had seen all kinds of things. Suddenly, a huge explosion happened right in front of them, completely destroying several houses. Nami's eyes widened at what had just happened, not noticing that Luffy had pushed both her and Zoro a few feet away from him. I will crush him, Luffy growled, marching forward. Soon they reached a shop, with a small dog standing in front of the store. Luffy noticed the small wounds around his little body. Hey doggy, why are you guarding this cool store? Luffy asked, expecting a bark back. I'm guarding my treasure, the dog told Luffy. Luffy was shocked he could understand him, but rolled with it, determining it to be a mystery power. Why is it your treasure? Luffy asked in thought. Boodle answered the question without knowing it. That's Cho-Cho. He was told to guard this store by his master. But his master died, and Cho-Cho won't abandon it. It's his treasure and the most important thing to him, the mayor said, sitting cross-legged on the ground. Nami asked the man where the others were, and he told them that they were in a safe place. The memories are the only thing I have left, Cho-Cho told Luffy through the mystery power. I've tried to tell him. I've even offered for him to stay at my house, but he won't listen, Boodle said and then sighed. You are right. He doesn't want to abandon his treasure. When we lose someone important, memories are the only thing we have left to keep them alive in our hearts, Luffy said. Nami smiled at Luffy, almost feeling tears in her eyes. With her own mother in her mind, she saw that Luffy was someone to truly respect. Unlike that monster, Luffy was a completely different kind of man. Zoro nodded at Luffy's words, having his own memories of a certain dear friend. The mayor nodded as well and opened his mouth to ask something, but suddenly another house exploded, and a big purple lion stepped through the rubble. Richie! Eat fast, and today we will burn this old store. Moji said, and the lion named Richie made a happy sound. No. I won't let him. Cho-Cho said. Luffy watched as the dog got into a defensive stance in front of the store and started barking loudly. Richie ignored the barking and continued towards the food store. Cho-Cho tried to attack, but was hit aside by Richie, who was about to pounce on the store. I'll protect the store for you, Luffy said through the mystery power. He then let out a wave of Conqueror's Haki, focusing it all on Richie, who was instantly knocked unconscious. You bastard! What did you do to Richie? Moji yelled, moving away from the unconscious Richie and pulling out a whip. Luffy grabbed his whip, his face completely serious, all cheerful expressions gone. This is his treasure. You knew that, and you kept stealing from it, and now you want to destroy it, Luffy growled. Before the man could utter a word, his eyes went white and he spit out saliva. A fist had connected to his chest, and a shockwave went straight through his body before coming out his back. Moji felt all his inside screaming in pain, as if someone had punched his internal organs directly. He spit out blood before falling onto his knees, his face in the dirt. Zoro spoke nothing of it, and neither did Nami, who fully supported what Luffy did. We are going to buggy. It's time for a fight, Luffy stated. Zoro smirked, ready to fight. Later. The buggy pirates could only be to blame for the noise and music emanating from the big pub. The pirates seemed to still be rejoicing over their seizure of Orange Town. Luffy was perplexed as to why they felt the need to rip the village apart piece by piece. While bounty hunting, Zoro had met his fair share of nasty pirates, so the buggy pirates' actions didn't surprise him. Nami could only clench her teeth, having seen such indiscriminate damage every time Arlong lost his cool and raised a town on the Konomi Islands. Look at them. They're celebrating wrecking people's lives by partying, Nami grumbled as she turned to face Luffy. All of their wealth is now mine. When I'm done, they won't have a single berry left. You should leave a portion of it for the community to reconstruct afterward, Luffy answered, his gaze fixed on the tavern's roof where the celebration was taking place. Nami paused for a moment, thinking, before nodding. Luffy was correct. These people would at the very least need some financial assistance in order to rebuild their houses. In the not a scumbag pirate category, she gave Luffy another point. Sure, I'm not going to take it all. When you're done with them, I'll see you too, Nami said, turning to walk away with a nod. Ooh? No, you must also fight, Luffy said with his trademark smile. Nami's eyes widened before she shook her head gently. If you want to improve your haki, you'll need to practice. It'll be best to begin with weak opponents like this rather than trying to earn experience against Grand Line pirates, Luffy explained. But... Nami stumbled over her words, trying to think of reasons why this was a poor idea. She wasn't quite ready for frontline combat yet. Luffy had only recently begun teaching her haki. She had to concentrate quite hard simply to achieve the tiniest of results from her observation. But I'm not a strong fighter. Just a few days ago, I was a thief, she spoke in a jumble of words. Relax. I'm not going to let you get injured, Luffy put his hand on her shoulder and grinned. I'll keep my word. If it seems that you are in over your head, I will intervene. Besides, you're a natural, I doubt most of these men have even a fraction of your expertise. Nami grumbled, but she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride when Luffy praised her abilities. As she gathered her composure and prepared herself, a faint grin appeared on her face. Shishishi. Let's get their attention, Luffy laughed before lifting his palm and unleashing a bolt of lightning, which was immediately followed by a deafening boom. The roof's edge burst, scattering debris over the rooftop. For a brief moment, the buggy pirates were in a state of confused fear until their captain walked out of a tent and shouted at them to calm down. Blue hair, an orange captain's hat and coat, a red and white striped shirt, light green trousers, and sharp clown shoes characterized the man. The huge, bright red nose on his face was his most distinguishing feature. Who the heck are these flamboyant scumbags? Staring down at the group on the street, the captain screamed fiercely. Who told you those colors were meant to go together? Nami frowned at the man's outfit, which clashed so badly. These flashy nobodies show up and wreck my get-together. Then they make fun of my attire right to my face. I'm so enraged that I can't even talk. As he tightened his fists, the clown's expression was filled with rage. How about I go down there and give these idiots a lesson, Captain? A tall, dark-haired man inquired. He didn't have a shirt on and was dressed in white trousers and sneakers, wearing a long white and blue checkered scarf over his neck. Hey! You knucklehead! Bring your obnoxious red nose down here so I can squish it. Before Buggy could speak to his subordinate, Luffy screamed out. Everyone on Buggy's team immediately went wide-eyed, and perspiration started to trickle down their cheeks. For a moment Buggy shook, his jaw clenched so tightly that you could practically hear his teeth grinding. It's time to fire the Buggy ball. Fire! Buggy screamed, a grimace of wrath on his face. On the edge of the rooftop, a cannon was wheeled over and directed towards Luffy. It went off with a tremendous bang a split second later. Luffy! Get out of the way! Nami screamed as she dived for safety. She knew he could throw a cannonball, but this looked like a much larger and more dangerous explosive. Meanwhile, Zoro gazed in bewilderment at his leader. Was Luffy planning to take the shot directly? Cannonball! Luffy chuckled as he plucked the red metal ball right out of the air with his palm. Do you believe this insignificant object will do anything? For training, my grandfather hurled boulders bigger than this at me. And he tossed them much faster. Here's your chance to have it back. Luffy grinned and launched the scarlet cannonball back at the buggy pirates with a hard pitch. The explosion was considerably louder than the one they had heard earlier. The blast caused the whole bar to collapse, leaving a mass of splintered wood and stone in its wake. You idiot, Luffy! Nami screamed as she encircled his neck with her hands and began shaking him back and forth. What if the treasure map was up there? Shishishi. Nami, please accept my apologies, Luffy laughed. The hands wrapping around his neck made no difference to him, which made Nami shake him even harder. You know, I guess I'm going to trust you whenever you claim you can achieve something that seems impossible, Zoro grinned as he watched the smoke begin to disperse from the ruins. Nami, you'll take the stage first. I don't believe I annihilated them all with their own cannonball, Luffy said as he deftly wriggled out from her clutches. Are you certain I have to fight? Nami gasped, and then smirked wickedly as an idea occurred to her. She walked up to Luffy with a swing to her hips and bowed slightly in front of him. She knew her top showed off her figure wonderfully, and more than one fool had been tricked out of his money by her charm. You know, if you just let me go steal the treasure, I may be able to convince you to purchase some nice meat, she exhaled teasingly, knowing Luffy's weakness for his favorite food. Without practice, you won't grow any stronger. Without practice, your observation will not improve, Luffy said with a raised eyebrow, before catching a short glimpse down at her. Look at these flamboyant punks, behaving as if they don't fear us. Buggy was using his disembodied hands to prop up two of his charred crew members. His hands were free-floating, and his arms were folded in front of him. He's got a devil fruit! Nami exclaimed, her eyes widening. What in the world are you doing, you scumbags? Luffy yelled at the top of his lungs. How did you manage to use your own Nakama as shields like that? Captain Buggy, this is the most humiliating experience our crew has ever had. The black-haired man, Kabaji, was using another crewmate as a shield in front of him. The remainder of the crew who weren't knocked down yelled in unison as they drew various weapons, including clubs, swords, knives, and firearms. The pirates raised their weapons in the air and roared war cries. The buggy pirates enraged Luffy. He was tempted to just wipe them out with a single bolt of lightning, but he knew Nami would benefit from the experience. His navigator needed to understand that she could be a strong fighter. Luffy was certain that she could defeat these opponents, and he promised to keep an eye on her battle. Don't worry, Nami. If you can't handle it, I'll step in. I'm not going to let them hurt you, Luffy chuckled. Think about what you'll get after we're done. The majority of their wealth will be yours. Shishishi. Nami's eyes glowed, and Luffy could swear they looked like berry symbols for a brief moment. What do you mean, you thief? You stole our treasure. With his eyes popping out of his skull, Buggy shouted. The pirate surged forward with a yell, and Nami focused her senses as much as she could. She sprang forward and swung her staff at the nearest pirate, feeling the unmistakable expansion of her awareness that came with activating observation haki. Nami's staff crashed into the man's ankle, knocking him down. She lashed another guy across the face with a spin to avoid a knife attack from behind, sending blood flying and knocking out several teeth. This isn't as difficult as I anticipated, Nami thought to herself as she plunged her stick directly into the midsection of another pirate. The man collapsed with a loud squeal before losing consciousness. Nami took 2 steps back as a club slammed into the ground where she had been standing, having sent someone coming from her blind spot. Her staff slammed into the back of the man's skull, knocking him unconscious. These men are nothing in comparison to Luffy, she reflected as she smashed a pirate's blade out of his hand with her staff, before flipping the end upward and smacking him in the jaw. A short lapse in her newly gained observation allowed a pirate to approach her, and she staggered backward to escape being cut. Her staff caught the man in the ribs with a twist of her body. The pirate wheezed loudly as the wind was knocked out of his lungs, and Nami smacked him in the head as hard as she could, knocking him out cold. Nami instantly turned after hearing multiple guns cock behind her. The pirates scowled at her with their guns pointed directly at her figure. Nami realized she had gotten ahead of herself and let her observation wane. Die! One of the pirates roared as they all prepared to shoot. For bursts of dazzling light flashed through the air. All four pirates collapsed to the ground, their eyes rolling back. She grinned as she turned to face Luffy, who was standing with his straw hat on and his hand extended toward the downed pirates. "Thank you, Luffy." Nami grinned as she returned her attention to the remaining pirates and rushed them. The first swung his club horizontally, only for Nami to duck and smack him across the temple. The last two attempted to assault her with their own clubs, yelling war cries. Nami took a couple of steps back before springing to the side and slamming her staff into the first pirate's knee, sending him to the ground in agony. The last pirate became enraged and swung his club at Nami's head. Nami avoided the swing, closed the distance, and delivered a powerful strike to the man's stomach that knocked him unconscious. Yuck! Nami frowned as she sprang away from the mess on the floor. "I'll make you pay for damaging my crew." A roar erupted behind Nami. She turned to look, her eyes widening as she saw the dark-haired man charging toward her with his sword drawn. She attempted to move, but she knew she wouldn't be able to do it quickly enough. She closed her eyes, but then heard the sharp sound of metal colliding with metal. Nami opened her eyes and smiled in relief. Zoro stood in front of her, nonchalantly blocking the pirate's sword with one of his own. "Oi! What sort of swordsman strikes from behind?" Zoro interrogated the long-haired pirate. Nami moved away from the oncoming brawl as the two swordsmen stared each other down. "Nami, that was fantastic!" "I told you that you could do it," Luffy guffawed as he scooped her up by the waist and spun her around in celebration. Nami let out a startled gasp before realizing what was happening and laughing softly. "Thank you, Luffy," Nami said, leaning back against his chest with a smile. The battle hadn't lasted long, but she wasn't accustomed to facing large numbers of enemies on her own. Luffy didn't seem to mind being used as a resting post, holding Nami securely while watching Zoro fight. "You're Roronoa Zoro," exclaimed the pirate as he examined the green-haired swordsman. They both observed that this stranger was, strangely enough, riding a unicycle. "My name is Kabaji, Chief of Staff of the Buggy Pirates. As a fellow swordsman, I look forward to taking your head." Kabaji leaped forward on his unicycle, charging toward Zoro. Acrobat technique, special fire breathing. The sudden blast of fire caught Zoro off guard. Kabaji's foot lashed out through the distraction, the sharp toe of his shoe slamming into Zoro's ribcage. "What was that? Kicks and cheap tricks? Do you think you have any honor as a swordsman?" Zoro swiftly regained his footing, glaring at the man. "Honor? That is not something I need. All I need is to win." Acrobat technique, steam curtain. Kabaji chuckled as he spun and hopped about on his unicycle, stirring up a thick cloud of dust. "This guy irritates me," Zoro hissed, attempting to perceive his opponent with his newly acquired observation haki. Zoro deflected a blade that emerged from the fog with his left sword. Another kick followed, but Zoro saw it coming and stepped back, making the kick miss completely. As he spotted Kabaji through the veil of dust, Zoro's eyes darkened. "You weak coward, you bring dishonor to swordsmen everywhere. Facing all three of my swords is more honor than garbage like you deserves, so I'm ending this now. Three-sword style, onigiri." Kabaji's chest and shoulder exploded with blood. Before he even hit the ground, Zoro was already standing behind him, and Kabaji collapsed unconscious. "Kabaji!" Buggy screamed in terror as he witnessed his chief of staff fall. "Shishishi!" "Zoro, good battle," Luffy said, expressing his gratitude to his swordsman. "That was a waste of my time." "What a kook," Zoro snorted, sheathing his weapons. Buggy's hat cast a dark shadow over his face. "You have no right to do this to my crew. I'm going to destroy you all." "You hideous red nose, we're pirates," Luffy responded casually as he stepped away from Nami and began walking toward Buggy. "You scumbag, don't bring up my nose." Buggy raged. "What is your objective? What brought you here?" "We've come to take your wealth as well as the Grand Line chart you stole," Nami demanded with a smirk. Big nose, hand them over, Luffy ordered the pirate. Gia ha ha ha. You know name novices aren't welcome on the Grand Line. What do you intend to do there? Sightseeing? Don't make me laugh. Buggy screamed loudly, causing Luffy to come to a halt. I'm going to be the Pirate King, Luffy declared. You knucklehead! You? The Pirate King? Then I'm going to be God. I am the one who will amass all of the world's wealth. Buggy shrieked. Shishishi. As if I'd listen to a lecture from someone with an ugly red nose like you. Let me finish this quickly, Luffy laughed, taking his battle stance. You bastard! Buggy yelled, holding knives between his fingers on both hands. Chop chop cannon! The clown screamed and thrust his hands forward, attempting to impale Luffy. However, Luffy was no longer standing where he had been a split second before. Buggy was sent crashing to the ground after a heavy strike to the side of his face. You're not that bright, are you? Who announces their attack and gives their opponent time to react? Luffy questioned as Buggy tried to get back on his feet. I mean, if you outclassed your opponent to the point where it didn't matter, I could understand. But that's not the case here. I'm going to kill you. Buggy hissed, sending his floating hands around to attack Luffy from behind. Luffy grinned, effortlessly dodging the floating hands with minimal movement. Buggy broke into a cold sweat as he saw Luffy dodge with a technique he recognized from his time aboard the Oro Jackson. How? How can a no-name pirate like you use Haki? I learned it from my grandfather. Straw Hat, I'm still going to defeat you. Buggy screamed, with considerably less confidence than before. Luffy's sandal-clad foot smashed into Buggy's chest, sending the clown flying down the street in a burst of motion. I have my doubts, Luffy spoke casually, as if he were talking about the weather. This is really rather disappointing, so I'm going to call it a day. Luffy's hand became engulfed in visible, compressed air. Nami looked on in curiosity as the air around his arm concentrated densely. Air fist! Luffy struck his hand directly into Buggy's chest. A massive blast of compressed air shot out from behind Buggy's back, blasting him clear out of sight toward the horizon. Luffy triumphantly raised his fist. That was a bit of a letdown, Zoro remarked as he and Nami walked up to Luffy. Shishishi! Nami smirked and playfully bumped Luffy with her shoulder as she walked by. So, I'm going to start gathering up all the treasure they have. I'm sure they'll have the Grand Line map as well. Nami grinned, walking toward the tent behind the bar where Buggy stored his loot. Well, it seems the mayor brought the rest of the townspeople back like you requested, Zoro noted, gesturing toward the approaching crowd. When Luffy looked over, he saw Boodle and Cho-Cho leading the townspeople toward them. Do you think they'll offer us food in exchange for taking care of Buggy? Luffy inquired, his stomach grumbling right on cue. Nami was right. You never stop thinking about food, Zoro groaned with a shake of his head, though he certainly wouldn't turn down a good drink right about now. Chapter 7, Gecko Islands and Usopp. It had been a few days since they left Orange Town. Luffy trained them every day without mercy. According to him, they were still very far from being ready to fight against big enemies like a Yonko and others. It was better to be safe than sorry. At this point, Nami was not complaining anymore. She did not try to say that she was tired, not that the trick ever worked to begin with. Nami checked the weather and smiled, seeing that it was a sunny day. She and Zoro had just finished their training for today. Well, more like she finished, Zoro was still training with Luffy, mostly working on his armament Haki. Nami had not said it out loud, but she had seen the progress she was making. She knew she was still far away from Luffy's level, but this was better than nothing. Looking behind her, she saw Luffy dodging Zoro's attacks with a blindfold around his eyes, just laughing every time he heard Zoro growling. Nami giggled at the image and thought back to what Luffy told her the night after he defeated Buggy. Nami had kept staring at the night sky, the full moon clear, illuminating the darkness around them. Nami knew she was close. Almost there, she told herself. Soon her family could be free, and perhaps after that, she could. "What are you doing still awake, Nomi?" She suddenly heard a voice. Turning around, she saw Luffy with a plate full of meat in his right hand. "Just thinking, Luffy," she spoke in a low tone. From the look her captain gave her, she knew he did not really believe her. "What about you? You cannot sleep?" she asked, trying to change the conversation from her to him. She leaned against the balcony railing. "I was hungry, so my stomach woke me up," he said with a grin before taking a bite. Nomi rolled her eyes. Sometimes Luffy could act like a child. Silence took over them. Nomi prepared to go back to her bed, but Luffy looked into her eyes. "I know you are not telling me something. You know you are my Nakama. As one, I will walk through hell just to help you, in whatever you might need." Luffy spoke with determination, his voice sincere, speaking no lies. Nomi swallowed a breath. She felt guilt in her chest. She did not know why, but she felt horrible. She bit her lips, wanting to tell Luffy, to tell him everything, but... "I appreciate it, Luffy. Perhaps I will tell you, very soon," she finally spoke. Luffy accepted the answer, grinned, and nodded his head. Now, Nomi felt she was being unfair to her Nakama and captain. She knew Luffy was strong. Luffy defeated the likes of Buggy as if he were a kid. Looking at them now, she saw Luffy dodging the attacks of Zoro as if Zoro were someone who was using a sword for the first time in his life. She silently swore to tell Luffy soon. He was not like the other pirates. He was a kind one, someone she could trust and call captain, and maybe something more. Soon Zoro and Luffy stopped training. Zoro was sweating bullets while Luffy was just relaxing without his shirt on. Nomi again found herself distracted by his muscles. They looked quite nice. She felt her hands wanting to go there and touch his chest, making her feel something she had not felt before, like a burning fire in her stomach. "An island! I see an island. Maybe there is a meat store there. Set course for that island." The interruption served to cease Nomi's growing warm thoughts. The boat scraped against wet sand, and the budding straw hat crew stepped onto terra firma. Luffy grinned and examined the surroundings as Nomi consulted her maps to find information on the island, and Zoro stretched. "Someone is watching us," Luffy suddenly stated. This put both Nomi and Zoro on guard. Zoro put his hand on the pommel of his sword. They got their answer when pirate flags tied to sticks rose up all across the bushes at the top of the cliff face, and projectiles suddenly erupted against the sand at Luffy's feet. Out of nowhere, a man appeared at an outcropping halfway down the cliff. A green bandana slightly tamed his bushy black hair. He wore brown overalls, yellowish boots, and had a bag slung over one shoulder. His most prominent feature was his long nose. "Halt," he yelled out in a vaguely overdramatic fashion. "If you are planning on taking over this island, forget about it. I am the captain of the pirate crew that rules the village. Men and children adore me as Captain Usopp. Leave right now, or my 80 million men will crush you all." This was all said in a tone that practically screamed liar. Please, he is obviously lying. "If you are going to lie, make it believable," Nomi said. Usopp gave a jerk, as if honestly surprised that she had seen through it, before resuming his extravagant tone, shouting, 80 million might be an exaggeration, but my men are more than a match for you." Nomi gave a little grin, asking, "You mean all three of them?" At her words, 3 kids with oddly shaped heads popped out of the bushes and started running away, screaming all the while. Usopp was now thoroughly deflated, but he seemed to muster some kind of desperate courage. He pulled out a slingshot and a pachinko ball before lining up with Luffy, who had his hat shading his eyes. "All right, I lied about all that. But you still cannot come here. As you saw, my skills with the slingshot are greater than that of a pistol. I cannot allow you to pass, my honor will not allow it. That is why people call me Usopp the Proud." As if to contradict his words, Usopp's entire body was trembling with fear. His aim remained steady, however. Luffy grinned. He liked this guy. It was time to test his character. Risk your life, Luffy said, drawing confusion from his crew and Usopp. With that shot, you will risk your life, Luffy repeated, looking up to stare at Usopp. This is not a kid's game. With those words, Luffy brought his haki to the surface, not actively using it, just shaping it into a kind of presence that would not be agreeable to the faint of heart. Zoro was unaffected, being pretty tolerant of Luffy's haki, though Nami seemed a tad sweaty. Usopp, at the other extreme, went into near convulsions of fear. Luffy's eyes never wavered from his stare. Zoro added fuel to the fire with, "The man before you is a true pirate. Don't toy with us." Slowly, Usopp sank to his knees, his slingshot forgotten. "I should have known," he said. "The words of a true pirate are much more intimidating than my own." He hung his head. He was still conscious, which told Luffy a whole lot right there, such as the fact that despite the man's obvious fear of conflict, he had an iron will that he might not even be aware of. Luffy grinned. He and Zoro exchanged glances before bursting out laughing, eliciting a small smile from Nami and a look of confusion from Usopp. When Luffy was in control again, he yelled up at Usopp, "Oi! Isn't your dad Yasopp? I used to know him. Let's talk over food." The words were such a surprise that Usopp fell from his perch to collide with the ground. However, he picked himself up without difficulty and looked the crew up and down as if trying to decide something, before he started grinning and laughing as if a switch had flipped in his personality. In a much more jovial mood, he led the three of them up the trail to Syrup Village, where he proceeded to treat them at a restaurant. Along the way, Luffy noted the glares of mixed annoyance and weary tolerance thrown Usopp's way. It was obvious even to him that Usopp's lying was a big thorn in everyone's side, but they were so used to it that they had grown comfortable with the habit. Still, one day they might snap. Luffy noted this out of the corner of his eye, more concerned with the heavenly smell of cooked meat under his nose as he enjoyed the meal Usopp had bought for them. "So, you knew my dad?" Usopp asked, waiting until the odd pirate crew had started their meal. Luffy nodded vigorously, simultaneously consuming meat and apples at a rate that would make a lesser man sick. "Yeah, he was on Shank's crew when they were based at my village," Luffy said, taking a break in his feasting. "Your dad was a pretty cool guy. He was the best marksman ever. He once shot the wings off a fly while I watched. He was also always talking about his son, saying how he wished he could be with him." Luffy grinned wildly. "I heard so much about you growing up, Usopp. My ears practically fell off." Usopp grinned broadly as if Luffy had just given him the best news of his life. "My father talked about me, you say? Bragged, even?" Luffy nodded, returning to his food for a while. Usopp seemed to be on a complete high for a little bit. Soon they talked about what they were doing and where they were going next, with Luffy stating that they would soon go to the Grand Line. Usopp, who had been totally lost up to this point, suddenly looked like he was having a stroke. Everyone at the table looked at him in concern before he managed to utter, "The Grand Line." At that, Luffy, Nami, and Zoro all sighed, forgetting that the crew's destination was the object of much fear. Luffy patted Usopp on the back, slightly clearing the man's lungs after they had contracted in fear. "Cheer up. We are strong. Besides, I am the one who is going to find One Piece and become the Pirate King. I need to go to the Grand Line to do that." The logic was simple and straightforward, but it seemed to hit home. Usopp's gaze turned inward before he started to talk as if to himself. "My dream is to be a brave warrior of the sea, like my father before me. He is in the Grand Line. If I could make it there." His expression was oddly somber before he closed his eyes and smiled as if suddenly thinking of a joke. "It's too bad I'm too big a coward to leave this village. I like you guys, but with all respect, you are sailing to your deaths. Still, is there any way I can help you? I want to be able to say I at least tried to help." Luffy grinned before shaking his head. It was up to Usopp to realize that his heart had already decided. Focusing on the present, Luffy addressed the immediate problem for the crew. "Now that you mention it, is there a place we can find a ship?" We cannot keep going around in two small boats, or at least that is what Nomi says. I don't see why, but she's the smart one, so. He failed to notice how Nomi flushed slightly at the compliment. Usopp looked as if his first instinct was to lie and say there was no such place, but then his mouth closed as he started to consider it. He had promised, had he not? Besides, this man had the kind of aura that made Usopp want to earn his trust, not abuse it. Debating internally, he finally decided to take the right path. Well, I am friends with the young lady who lives in the mansion up the hill. She has been depressed since her parents died, and I have been amusing her with my lies. Maybe if I put in a good word, she would consider having a ship commissioned for you. Is that okay with you guys? Luffy grinned, looking to see identical smiles on his Nakama's faces. Let's give it a shot. But first, we finish eating. With that, Luffy seemed to inhale all the food on the table in the blink of an eye, making Usopp's eyes widen, while Nomi and Zoro started muttering about him finishing off their food for them again. Luffy paid them no mind. The chief rule that he lived his life by was, when you are hungry, eat, regardless of whether the food was his or not. A king needed strength to rule, after all. Still casting looks toward Luffy, Usopp led them out of the restaurant. He was just about to lead them up toward the manor when Pierman, Ninjin, and Tamaneji jumped out from behind some nearby barrels, carrying wooden daggers and yelling, for the Usopp pirates. They began their charge straight at the trio of pirates, not even noticing their astounded captain. Nothing permanent, Luffy nonchalantly commanded, before waiting until the last second to give Tamaneji, who had aimed for him, a bash on the head that drove him into the dirt. In the same moment, Zoro chopped Pierman with the back of his blade, and Nomi gave Ninjin a quick kick. The three children dropped like rocks. Usopp looked appalled at the damage to his crew. Oi! Why did you do that? They are just kids. Luffy shrugged and merely said, they got in the way. With that, he arranged the three more comfortably on the side of the road to avoid foot traffic and allow them to rest in peace. Usopp glowered for a second before sighing in defeat and continuing with the journey up the hill. As they neared the estate, Usopp maneuvered them away from the foreboding bodyguards, leading them toward an unassuming hedge that was actually as sturdy a wall as the steel gate at the main entrance. With a knowing smirk, Usopp grabbed a section of the hedge, revealing it to be a secret door. Holding a finger to his lips, Usopp snuck through the hole, leaving the crew to follow behind him. Luffy took one look and said, "Wow, this girl is living it up. This place is huge." Quick as lightning, Luffy's mouth was covered by Usopp's hand. "Shush," the marksman hissed before letting Luffy go. The pirate captain pouted but kept his silence. Usopp, with stealth worthy of Nomi's operations, made his way to a tree near the south wall, where he proceeded to climb up and knock on the nearby window. A fair woman with blonde hair and pale skin answered, a joyful expression on her face. "Usopp! You are here! What story are you going to tell me today?" Usopp grinned, blushing faintly, and said, "Well, there was the time I was 5 when I fought off a giant goldfish, but I have something to ask you first, Kaya." At her confused expression, Usopp indicated Luffy and the gang at the base of the tree. "These guys are pirates that came to bask in the glory of Captain Usopp's presence, but they are in need of a ship. Being the proud and merciful captain that I am, I decided to help them. I was wondering if you might not mind lending them a ship." Kaya paused before regarding the crew. She noted Zoro's calm stance, Nomi's confident air, and the sparkle in Luffy's eyes. A grin spread across her features. Kaya was a good judge of character. She opened her mouth to voice her approval, but was interrupted by the harsh cry of "Halt!" Everyone turned to look at an approaching man. He wore a fine tuxedo, oddly striped shoes, and slightly loose glasses over his sharp eyes, his dark hair immaculately combed. He possessed an intimidating air and made Usopp visibly start to panic. The man stopped a few yards away from the group, looking up at them and saying, "You have no business here. Please leave before I am forced to call the bodyguards." He fixed his glasses with an odd motion of his wrist, using the palm of his hand rather than his fingers. Luffy felt something off about the man. Call it a king's intuition, but Luffy suspected that this man was more than he appeared. Kaya spoke up. Please, Klahadore, don't mind them. They are friends of Usopp, and they wanted to ask me before she was cut off. Please, Kaya, don't defend them. They are obviously ruffians, and they don't belong. The crew's eyes narrowed at the insult, and Luffy started to ominously crack his knuckles. Klahadore ignored them. Is that Usopp up there? The caretaker asked, making Usopp jump. I have heard quite a lot about you around the village. They say that you lie and make everyone's life difficult. I guess that is what one should expect since you are the son of a low-class pirate. A contemptuous sneer materialized on Klahadore's face. Usopp's fear melted into anger in the space of a second. What did you say? Usopp asked with as much malice as he could muster as he used a hook in his bag to descend to the ground. Klahadore glared at Usopp as if he were something dirty he had gotten on his shoes. Your father abandoned your mother and yourself so that he could spend his life pirating. He is a low-class thief and nothing more. Usopp began to see red. Klahadore, stop this! Kaya yelled, seeing Usopp angry. Klahadore continued, and it shows. You spend your days lying to the village and worming yourself into our young lady's life. What is it a low life like you want from her? Is it money? How much do you want? The sound of flesh smacking flesh filled the air. Usopp was so angry he had socked Klahadore right across the face, an expression of undeniable rage on his features. The caretaker clutched his cheek from his position on the ground and cried, You see that? I upset him, and he immediately turned violent. Such a dangerous person should not be near you. Shut up! Usopp yelled back at him with such force that even Luffy was stunned. You are calling my dad a low-life? He is anything but. My father sails the seas as a true warrior of the sea. I am proud to be related to him, for I am the son of a pirate. A small pulse of haki, too subtle to be fully realized, burst forth from Usopp as he said this, making Luffy pause in his advance to join Usopp in hitting the caretaker. Wow, he used haki just by proclaiming his pride in something, Luffy thought. This guy really is not just a coward. Unexpectedly, Zoro was not forced to hold Luffy back. Instead, Luffy gave a grin. Usopp had just become the object of Luffy's focus, and that was a place no sane person could easily escape. Luffy yelled, Usopp! The man turned from his glare at Klahadore to regard Luffy with curiosity. Don't just say it, prove it! Luffy chuckled encouragingly. We need a marksman. Join our crew and be a true warrior of the sea like your dad. Usopp's eyes widened in surprise, while Zoro and Nami just grinned a little at their captain's antics. He had snagged a pirate hunter and a thief so far, so a pirate heir was par for the course. Before the long-nosed man could even process the offer, Klahadore stood up. He dusted himself off and said, How you low-lifes decide to gather together does not concern this household. All of you, leave now. Usopp glared at him one last time before turning to leave the way he had come, Luffy and the crew following behind him. On any other day, Luffy would have socked the man all the way back to Fuchsia village, but today he had a man to convince that being on the Straw Hat crew was the coolest thing in the world. No, Usopp said, crossing his arms with finality. Ah, come on, why not? Being a pirate is fun. We get to go adventuring, do whatever we want, and see the world. What more could you want? I will even make it a point to go looking for your dad. Please come with us. It was shortly after the group had left the mansion, and Luffy had kept up a non-stop barrage of persuading, which had so far been unsuccessful. Usopp was obstinate when it came to leaving his home. As he had repeatedly said, what would the Usopp pirates or Kaya or the villagers do without my lies to excite them? Of course, the people in question would have told Usopp in a heartbeat to follow his dream, but Usopp did not take that into consideration. Luffy, on the other hand, did not care. I don't care about that. You are going to be part of my crew. Usopp threw up his hands in exasperation before an interested expression came over his face. Ooh, what's that? Everyone turned to look at nothing. When they turned back around, a small dust cloud in the distance was the only thing left to mark that Usopp had ever been with them. Zoro sighed. I will give that guy one thing, he can run like hell. Nami nodded in agreement, impressed that someone could run that fast. Luffy sighed. Damn, and just when I was wearing him down. Now we need to find him so I can keep working on him. As the three walked down the path, they came upon the slowly awakening Usopp pirates. Luffy grinned at the lucky coincidence before making his way over. In a matter of minutes, Luffy had reached the coast. Usopp was indeed there, staring off at the waves. I know you are there, the man remarked as Luffy walked up. Luffy sat down next to Usopp, not saying anything yet. He could sense that Usopp was wrestling with something. The breeze was comforting as the two sat there at the border of the sky, earth, and sea, while one of them dealt with an internal crisis on an unprecedented scale. When I was a boy, Usopp eventually said, getting Luffy's attention, I used to go running through the village like I still do today, screaming that pirates were coming. I did it because I hoped if I said it enough times, it would come true. I wished that I would see my dad's ship on the horizon and know that I was not alone in this world. But he never came. Usopp sighed heavily, staring at his hands. It never even occurred to me to go looking for him myself. I was too cowardly. So, I just stayed here and kept lying to everyone, including myself. It's all I know how to do. But you guys. Usopp shook his head with an unrecognizable emotion. Wonder? Disapproval? Something else? You guys are so vibrant. Not an hour ago, I didn't know you existed, and yet you have done more exciting things in the time I have known you than I have had my whole life. Usopp chuckled to himself. I want to go with you. I truly do. But how can I? I have Piemon, Ninjin, and Tamaneji. There's also Kaya. I cannot just pack up and leave. Luffy touched his straw hat and brought it down to shade his eyes. He spoke up suddenly. You know what a pirate is? It is not some tough guy that goes around stealing from people, or pissing off the Marines, or even sailing through the Grand Line. A true pirate is a man who throws away his old life, all his friends and family and his home, for the sake of his dream. Luffy turned to face Usopp with a serious glint in his eyes. To become the Pirate King. To become the greatest swordsman, a pirate hunter became a pirate. To get 100 million berry and draw a map of the world, a thief that hated pirates traveled with 2 of them. Is your dream strong enough for you to leave Kaya and your friends behind? Usopp shuddered as the weight of the question fell on his shoulders. Fortunately for him, he did not have to answer right then and there because of the arrival of 2 very suspicious people at the bottom of the cliff. Usopp turned to look at them. One of them wore a cowboy hat, heart-shaped sunglasses, and had an odd goatee. His wardrobe looked like it had come out of the closet of some demented disco dancer, and he was toying with an odd steel ring in his hand. The other man was none other than Klahadore, the caretaker. Luffy was curious as to why the high and mighty guy was meeting at such a strange place with such a strange man, and joined Usopp in quietly listening to their conversation from their lofty perch. Klahadore turned to regard the odd man. Django, I thought I ordered you to remain inconspicuous. I find you lying in the middle of the road asleep with 3 kids. Don't tell me that you still have that problem. Klahadore fixed his glasses again, acting in a completely different manner than he had at Kaya's home. He was darker, more commanding, and much scarier. The man spread his arms out in a calming gesture. Calm yourself, Captain. I was just showing off to some kids. Anyway, what is this about? Your plan to insinuate yourself into the young lady's life and steal her fortune has played out beautifully for the past 3 years. My men are in place and raring to go. What possible reason do we have for this meeting, Captain Kuro? Unbeknownst to the man, he had just provided a gold mine of information to the 2 young men above them. Captain Kuro? As in, 100 Plan Kuro? He was one of the most notorious pirates in East Blue in his time. His planning abilities were unmatched. But the Marines executed him years ago. To think, Klahadore was secretly him all this time. Usopp shivered next to Luffy, who was regarding Kuro with confusion. This guy used to be a pirate? Why is he hanging around here on land? If there was one thing Luffy knew, it was that no true pirate could resist the call of the sea. Either this Kuro guy was weak-willed, Luffy concluded, or he was really just that greedy for Kaya's money. The newly revealed Captain Kuro sighed in annoyance. Django, how many times must I tell you? We cannot simply kill the girl. It would be best if you hypnotized her into writing a will, leaving everything to her caretaker Klahadore, namely me. I just wanted to make sure that the chaotic rabble that is your crew was capable of a little subtlety. Kuro fixed his glasses yet again and regarded Django with a glare. Django's grin was a smidge more false than it had been before. It is all prepared, Captain Kuro. The men know that they just have to ravage the village and leave the accident to me. We just need your signal tomorrow at dawn. It is up to us to deal with them. Luffy talked to Usopp, only to see Usopp's voice becoming more distant. Looking back, Luffy observed Usopp disappearing over the cliffs at the bottom of the slope. Luffy could practically hear the liar's thoughts with his observation haki, since the liar's ideas were so loud. I have to issue a warning to the villagers. I have to issue a warning to Kaya. Usopp yelled in his head as he rushed toward the settlement as quickly as he could. Usopp, now is not the time to be concerned. Luffy growled as he pursued the fleeing adolescent. Luffy only learned how quickly Usopp could go when he was motivated a fraction of a second later. As he hurried down the trail, he bumped into Nami and Zoro, who were both perplexed as to why Usopp had just sprinted by them seconds before. Luffy came to a halt and spent several minutes explaining the problem. Should we attempt to track down Usopp or go after this butler? With a contemplative expression on his face, Zoro inquired. On this island, we are outsiders. No one here would believe us when we say there are no false butlers. Nami expressed her dissatisfaction with the situation while shaking her head. Usopp is on his way back, Luffy said as he turned his head to the source of the weakening voice. Usopp was staggering along the trail, holding a gushing gash near his shoulder when the three arrived. No one believed me, he said. As he sat on a chair inside his little abode, Usopp mourned. While Luffy and Zoro sat around listening to Usopp's efforts to warn the villagers and Kaya about Kuro, Nami was cleaning his wound with the first aid kit Usopp had. Of course not. You say things like this all the time, and I have heard the boy who cried wolf tale before. Why did you expect them to trust you now, even if you are telling the truth? With a sneer, Zoro queried the long-nosed adolescent. If that is the case, I will have to halt the invasion on my own. With the proper preparedness, no pirate will be able to reach the settlement. Usopp lit a fire in his eyes. No, we will assist you. Usopp was taken aback by Luffy's smile, which made him look at him with surprise. Really? Are you serious about assisting me in defending the village? Usopp inquired. Isn't it true that we are friends? With his head tilted, Luffy inquired. So, what are your abilities? Usopp interrogated the three. I electrocute, choke, and engulf. Luffy said this while forming little dark clouds around his hand. I slice, Zoro said as he half unsheathed Wado Ikimunji. I steal, Nami smiled. I hide, Usopp said. You, too, are battling. All three pirates yelled at the liar. Later. The crew saw a pirate crew on a ship sailing toward them. It meant they were the Black Cat pirates, the crew of Kuro. Who are they? Someone asked, noticing the strange crew. Who cares? We are going to be rich. Prepare to rob. And I heard that this village has a gorgeous woman, one cheered, followed by everyone else. This caused Usopp to clench his teeth, ready to tear the bastards apart. Nami felt her anger rising. These men were animals. But before they could do anything, a huge wave of pressure suddenly spread. Luffy, Nami thought. Turning around, she saw Luffy had raised his hand, electricity engulfing it. Black clouds spread across the sky, bolts of lightning hitting the surface of the water near the ship, scaring the pirates. "You are no pirates. You are trash," Luffy stated before Nomi's eyes widened at what happened next. The following second, a dragon head made of white lightning slowly descended from the clouds, looking down directly at the pirate ship. "Raikiri!" A massive bolt of lightning suddenly slammed right at the ship, causing a massive explosion of light and illuminating the whole area. Nomi opened her eyes after the light went away. Instead of the ship, there was now only black smoke, with parts of a ship floating on the water. More than 80% of the pirates were floating some distance away in the water, their bodies not moving. Among the lucky ones were Django and two odd men that had hopped out of the water and seemed pretty pissed. Zoro yelled out from the top of the cliff, "Luffy! Were you planning to leave some for me, you selfish idiot?" Nomi and Usopp were silent beside him, their jaws practically disconnected in shock. Nomi had gotten a brief taste of Luffy's true power when he faced Buggy, but this was something else. "He can do it. He can really do it," she thought, her heart filling with hope for the first time in forever. Usopp, on the other hand, had never seen anything like this. Maybe he had hit his head yesterday morning and this was all a crazy dream? Sure, that would be more believable than the godlike strength this one man seemingly possessed. A man casting enormous lightning and destroying ships. Yep, I am dreaming. Django was now officially scared for his life, while the newly arrived Sham and Bucci were in a rage to find that someone had harmed their ship. As the two prepared to turn this kid into casserole, an angry voice abruptly broke the air. "What the hell is going on here?" Everyone turned in unison to stare at the new arrival, former captain of the Black Cat Pirates, 100 Plan Kuro. The man carried a bag over one shoulder, and his face was livid. Kuro was enraged. The idiots that he once called his crew had been late, and when he arrived to see what the hold-up was, he found the ship destroyed, over half his crew unconscious in the water, and the brats still alive. Kuro saw this as his crew deciding to have some fun in the sun instead of doing their job, and was consequently ready to kill. He was not even going to bother asking for an explanation. He was going to kill the crew ahead of schedule and drag Django bodily to hypnotize the young lady afterward. With practice movements that had not deteriorated in the intervening 3 years, Kuro opened the bag and expertly withdrew and donned his infamous cat claws, thickly padded gloves with a thin katana at each finger. As Kuro prepared himself, Luffy's crazy stamina made itself known, as the youth was suddenly ready for another round. He quickly issued orders to his crew, knowing it was not fair for him to hog all the fun. "Zoro, you have the two weird guys behind me. Usopp and Nomi handle the weirder guy. The caretaker is mine." Usopp might not have officially joined the crew, but Luffy's tone brooked no argument. Still not entirely sure that this was not a vastly complicated hallucination, Usopp pulled out his slingshot. The beauty of fighting like a coward was you did not have to move. Nomi grimly assembled her staff, thinking of the treasures she would acquire from the pirates after this mess to motivate her. Zoro, meanwhile, looked like a kid at Yuletide. He assumed his classic stance, with a blade in each hand and one between his teeth. Kuro narrowed his eyes but paid no heed. The kids could play around, but he was going to get his crew for this. Kuro, moving too fast to be seen, suddenly rushed forward, intent on making his crew pay for their ineptitude. Luffy's eyebrows raised in surprise before he threw a punch. The impossible happened, Kuro was hit while using his stealth foot. As if it were a signal, Zoro and Nomi rushed forward to deal with their assigned enemies as Usopp lined up his sights. The still furious ship guards rushed forward to deal with the sword guy charging them, not even bothering with the slip of a girl that passed by them. Django, now so frightened that his hair had started to turn white at the roots, grimly took out his chakram. He would deal with the girl before running away. Zoro? Zoro charged forward, his swords practically a part of his body as he held them. His motivation was fighting for top spot with his awe over Luffy's display of power. The young man had decimated almost an entire crew with one move. Sham and Bucci took the offensive. "Cat attack," they cried before rapidly slashing with their clawed gloves. Zoro expertly stopped the assault cold with his swords. The two pulled away before Zoro could pull off a move. The two seemed to be discussing a new battle plan, but Zoro ignored them. Silently, he got into the stance of one of his strongest Santorio techniques. Feel the power of the stance, channel the power of the blades to their fullest. The world slowed as Zoro focused on the move harder than he ever had, almost feeling it as a comfortable presence beside his soul. Suddenly, Zoro realized that he was feeling something within his soul. It felt alive, wild, the essence of the primal joy Zoro felt when he really let loose. Is this Haki? Zoro did not question how he had discovered the force or how he knew what it was. He just added it to the stance. Zoro gently seized the feeling and focused on nothing else except the stance, the move to come, and the blades in his grip. He felt the feeling cover his entire body, making him feel jittery, but he remained still as a statue. The partners had finished their plan and rushed forward to deliver a combo attack that would end this man's life like it was nothing. Three-sword style, Tiger Hunt. Zoro intoned, the words further refining his focus on the attack he would deliver. As the two came into range, their hands pulled back to deliver crippling slashes. Zoro moved, his blades coming down in a graceful, beautiful, yet deadly movement. In the space of a second, Zoro was behind his opponents, his swords all pointing forward. The veteran pirate seemed frozen for an instant before their chests erupted, blood gushing out in a spray. Zoro looked at his hands after pulling his swords back to their scabbards. I am not tired. I am getting stronger, Zoro murmured. Nomi. Nomi kept fighting against the man. He swung at her, but she beautifully dodged as if it were nothing. She could not help but have a feeling whenever the man tried to attack, allowing her to see his attacks clearly. Stay still, girlie, he growled, trying to attack again. Usopp prepared his slingshot, ready to fire when Nomi dodged before swinging her staff right at the side of his head. The sound of bone cracking was heard. The man was bleeding severely from his head, his face filled with rage and anger. Once I am done with you, I will kill your precious crew, he yelled, rushing at Nomi, whose eyes did not see him, but instead saw the monster who destroyed her life and her village. Never, she yelled, hitting his jaw and breaking it. The man fell to the ground, but Nomi struck again, and again, finally stopping as the man had stopped moving, his face covered in blood. Dead. Luffy. Luffy saw Kuro moving toward him. Someone else might have thought that he was fast, but to Luffy, who had practiced against the likes of Garp, Shanks, and Mihawk, this speed was nothing. Kuro moved, ready to slice him up. Luffy just closed his eyes. Kuro appeared right in front of him, his claws mere inches away from Luffy's throat before he stopped. Kuro could not feel anything. He wanted to move, yet he felt as if time itself had stopped. His vision became blurry before he coughed blood. Looking at his stomach, he saw a fist covered in dark air. Luffy stopped his attack as Kuro fell to his knees, coughing blood again. Laying on the ground, the man started making choking noises. His eyes turned from brown to red, his whole eye turning red like blood. You should be careful not to choke on your plans, Luffy said, as Kuro kept trying to breathe while his body slowly stopped moving. It was over. Chapter 8, Nomi's Desire. It was a few rare, quiet days of relaxation among the crew. Usopp had finally bowed to the inevitable. The three found his lies and boisterous attitude to be a great source of entertainment, though his constant requests to become captain got a trifle annoying. Kaya, though sad, was willing to let them go, and Usopp had sworn to return one day. Finally, on the day of their departure, the crew was given their treat. A caravel! Nomi cried in joy as the ship was revealed to them. It was a good ship, the sails were new, the hull was sturdy, and the figurehead gave off just the same clueless, innocent vibe their captain did. Merry proudly declared, "This ship may be of an old design, but it will carry you far. I call it the Going Merry." Kaya kissed Usopp before he left, much to the surprise of everyone. The marksman almost fainted. After that, they had one last goodbye before the man climbed onto the ship, going to join his new crew, his new life, his new destiny. As they pulled away from the island and Luffy sat perched on the figurehead, the captain had only one thing to say. "We are coming, Grand Line." Nami. The amount of tears she shed was abysmally minimal. In the beginning, she felt thoroughly alienated and disgusted by herself, and guilty for her apparent lack of grief. Yes, there had been big, fat, round tears in her eyes the moment the bullet's impact had thrown her mother's body backward, like a broken marionette whose strings had all snapped at the same time. And that was it, really, for the longest time. Nami's tears stopped the moment that cold and clammy hand had grabbed her by the scruff of her neck. Compared to the coldness of the shock, the sheer terror of knowing beyond a doubt that Belle Mere was gone, Arlong's hand was positively, disgustingly warm and alive. To this day, Nami remembers and marvels at the feeling of absolute clarity that poured into her mind that day while she was being carried away to where the fish men had chosen to set up base. The memory of the days that followed Belle Mere's death was not always as clear as the memory of the feeling of clarity she had experienced then. And in the years to follow, when she had grown and matured and begun to question and analyze herself, she would often wonder, had her mind been truly that much sharper, or had the world only suddenly become a lot more blurred? Of course, it did not matter in retrospect, even if it was an interesting conundrum to contemplate. As they pierced her skin with the needle dipped in Hatchen's ink over and over again, for hours with no end, there were no tears. As they laughed and joked about the foolhardy human Arlong had put into place on the day of their arrival whenever Nami was within earshot, there were no tears. As Arlong himself tore up the small sketch of her mother's grinning face, there were no tears. As she argued and haggled for the village's worth, for every single house and life it contained that she wanted to protect, to finalize their deal and pin that monster down if only verbally, there were no tears. As the villagers turned their back on her as one so unexpectedly, there were no tears. As the grave was dug on a cliff overlooking the vast oceans, there were no tears. As the casket holding her mother's lifeless form was entrusted to the island's life-giving soil, there were no tears. As Genzo spoke a few words over the grave, loud enough that it carried to the bushes where Nami crouched hidden from everyone's sight, simply remembering the woman that had given her the greatest gifts of all twice, there were no tears. Not even when the crudely made cross was placed upon the grave as a marker were there any tears. No tears at all. But when the sun set on the day of Belle Mere's funeral, when the shadows invaded the house that had been the only home she had ever known, the best and richest home she could have had, it now seemed to her, that was when the tears finally did come. And how they came. Every piece of furniture held echoes of her mother, had her mother's love written all over it. Her mother's ghost was lingering by the stove, stirring the memory of tangerine sauce. Her shadow was gently tugging on the old, faded curtains as she waited for Nojiko's blue hair to separate from the dark sky and long shadows to finally come home. Her voice echoed in Nami's ears like an intake of breath that should be followed by a mouth forming her name. Nami. That was when the tears were there, suddenly breaking through her lashes and stubbornly closed eyelids like a force of nature. A tidal wave of emotion, of agony, of desperation, of denial, of anger, so much that she felt she was drowning in them. Her mother could not be dead. Her mother had no right to be dead. Her mother did not deserve to be dead. How could her mother truly be dead? How could she when they needed her, when Nami would always need her like air to breathe, food to eat, water to drink, and sun and wind and earth, all those things that essentially spell life, but that you never think about because they are always there? Was it stupid of her to hope that the steps she heard outside of the house were her mother's? Was it delusional to pray and beg to every deity that the door slowly swinging open was being opened by the woman she logically knew to be dead and buried on a cliff with a view? Was it selfish of her to wish that the arms embracing her, rocking her back and forth in an attempt to soothe, were not her sisters, but her mother's? Even as they cried and sobbed together, as tears painfully crawled down both of their faces, Nami could not stop herself from wishing, from hoping, from praying, dreaming, begging, and bargaining with every deity that would listen to make it not real, to take it back. I would do anything, give anything, sacrifice anything. Just please, give us back our mother. What should I do? Please help us, mother. Nami opened her eyes, almost screaming. Her eyes immediately looked around, fearing she was back in that cursed room, only to see she was on the new ship, the Going Merry. She sighed in relief as cold sweat rolled down her forehead, still trying to catch her breath. She was with her crew. She was not alone with that monster. Suddenly the memories of her mother rushed in. She felt her eyes welling up, tears falling on her lap, his laughter ringing in her ears like a bell. Sha ha 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 ha. Her fingernails almost tore the mattress of her bed, her teeth clenching as she remembered his cursed laughter, laughing over the body of her mother. She suddenly remembered the promise Luffy had given her. You are my Nakama. I would go through hell for you. Her arms relaxed at his voice. Nami knew her captain was not lying to her. He spoke sincerely to her, the way he smiled at her. A smile slowly erupted on her face. Using her right hand, she wiped away the tears from her eyes and cheeks. You are my Nakama. Nami did not know how, but she found herself standing right in front of Luffy's door. It was the middle of the night, and the sea was as calm as ever. Now that Nami thought about it, she could not remember the sea being calm for so long. There should have been at least a storm by now. She wondered if they were just lucky, or if Luffy's weather abilities had something to do with it. Raising her hand, she prepared to knock on his door. Taking a deep breath, she knocked 3 times before stopping. The door opened, revealing Luffy with his shirt on, but unbuttoned. Nami knew Luffy had quickly thrown on a shirt before opening the door. Nami, what is it? Luffy asked, concerned, before noticing her eyes were red from crying. He was about to ask what was wrong. Luffy, can I come in? I need to tell you something, Nami requested softly, almost as if she did not want the rest of the ship to hear, despite it being the middle of the night. Luffy quickly nodded, opening the door wider and stepping aside as Nami walked inside. Surprisingly, she saw his clothes were well organized on a chair and not scattered around the floor. Luffy seemed to understand what she was thinking. Makino made sure to always tell me that I should keep my room clean, Luffy stated with a gentle smile before gesturing for Nami to sit either on his bed or on the chair. Nami sat at the edge of the bed. It was a large bed, with her legs dangling over the frame. Luffy sat on the chair near the bed, but Nami gestured for him to sit on the bed instead. Luffy said nothing, but sat at the end of the bed across from her. Turning her eyes to him, she felt her courage returning, her heart beating like a hammer in her chest. Luffy, you said you would always help your Nakama, she said, her voice insecure. Of course, Nami, Luffy said in a heartbeat, without second thoughts. Do you consider me your Nakama? Always, Nami, Luffy spoke, putting his hand on her shoulder to reassure her. Luffy, I need you to kill someone for me. Who? Along the saw, she spoke the name with pure venom, her hands clenching against the mattress of his bed. What did he do to you? Luffy asked with a dangerous tone, the same tone he used against the likes of Morgan and Buggy. Nami found herself shedding tears. She started telling him, and she did not stop until she had told him everything, Arlong killing her mother, forcing her to draw maps for him, and the deal to buy the village back for 100 million berry. Luffy held her close as she sobbed against his chest, her hands holding his shirt. He will die, Nami. Slowly. He will pay for everything. You have my word, Luffy promised, holding her close. The intensity of Luffy's anger caused violent winds to suddenly erupt around the sea, though not close enough to damage the ship. She cried for a minute before silence fell over them. Luffy held her close. The silence went on for 10 minutes before Nami pulled away. Thank you, Luffy. You have no idea how much that means to me, Nami thanked him. Luffy noticed the mark on her shoulder, his hand touching her skin around the tattoo. He marked me with his tattoo, Nami said, Luffy's eyes narrowing. I will tear his whole arm off for this, Luffy promised. This brought a dark smile to Nami's face, quite liking the thought of Arlong being torn to shreds. She stopped her thoughts. Her eyes were fixated on his eyes. The closeness made her feel safe and warm. His breath was close to her face. The man in front of her had saved her multiple times, had trained her, and had done nothing but good things. Her cheeks flashed red. Luffy grew concerned that Nami was perhaps sick. "Nami, are you?" He was stopped as Nami leaned in and kissed him. Luffy's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly kissed her back, wrapping his arms around her as she pulled him closer. Luffy held her firmly before gently pulling back, leaving Nami letting out a quiet sigh. "I am sorry, Nami," Luffy apologized quickly, moving slightly away. "Why are you apologizing? You are not my girlfriend. Makino and even Grandpa always told me that I should never treat a girl that way unless she is my girlfriend," Luffy explained. Makino, his grandfather, and the village doctor had given him and his brothers a talk about women, mostly the doctor, since his grandfather did not like explaining that kind of stuff, and Makino would turn bright red. Nami smiled at his words before leaning closer to his face. "If that is the case, then I would be happy to be your girlfriend." "Luffy, do you want to be my boyfriend?" Nami asked, her lips almost touching his. Luffy found himself surprised by her words. He had never thought a woman as beautiful as Nami would want him. "I would like that," Luffy said as he closed the gap between them once more. Nami returned the kiss with passion, resting her head against his chest as a wave of heat and affection washed over her. She felt a deep sense of love and relief that she had not experienced in years. She wanted to stay like this forever, reaching out to untie his shirt, but Luffy gently paused the kiss, making her look up at him. "Nami, I am really happy to be your boyfriend, but this is just the beginning. Maybe we should not rush things too quickly," Luffy stated gently. Nami smiled softly. She knew he was right, and she respected him all the more for it. "Very well, Luffy. But can I sleep here with you tonight?" she asked softly. "Of course, Nami. You can stay here whenever you want," Luffy said. Nami lay down on the bed, and Luffy lay beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist to hold her close. His touch felt warm and soothing, sending a wave of comfort through her entire body. His chin rested near her shoulder, breathing in the fresh orange scent of her hair and skin. "I like you, Nami," he whispered. "I like you too, Luffy," she replied softly. Soon, sleep came over them as Luffy held her close. Nami could not remember the last time she had felt so safe and so loved. "My captain," she thought, "I will do my best to ensure that you become the king of the pirates." The next day, Nami continued to steer their course while Zoro went to the upper deck to swing his heavily weighted practice sword. Right now, Luffy was actually taking care of one of the more important duties of being the ship's captain, designing the flag. "Finished," Luffy declared loudly while holding up the black painted cloth. "What do you think?" That you badly need lessons was what they were all thinking. They could see what he had tried to create. They really could. If they squinted and tilted their heads a little, they could just make out a grinning skull wearing what was supposed to be Luffy's hat. Luffy, how can I say this?" said Nami, who was trying to think of a nice way to let him know that his flag was not that good. "Your flag looks like crap," Zoro said, saving Nami the trouble. Luffy's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked down at it and eyed it critically. "Really? What is wrong with it? Do you think it should look angry?" "No, it is fine." "You are just terrible at drawing," replied Zoro. "For a second, I thought you just did not like the design," Luffy stated, sighing in relief. "Lucky for you, I, the great and powerful Usopp, just so happen to be a world-famous artist." "Right. I do not believe you. So I have taken the task of designing our Jolly Roger upon myself. Witness the awe-inspiring symbol of this mighty crew." He unfurled another large black cloth. They had to admit that it was a really nice flag. It showed real promise. From the flag, it was clear that Usopp had a steady hand and genuine artistic talent, as well as a serious case of narcissism, given that the skull had a long nose and a slingshot behind it. "That is not our symbol, idiot!" Nami belted out along with a smack to the back of the liar's head. Usopp quickly drew another flag using Luffy's original design. With Usopp's artistic skills, the Jolly Roger was ready, and so were the sails. Bam! Luffy and Nami jolted up at the sound of something heavy hitting the deck, then jumped a mile as they came face to face with the business end of a cannon. "Look what I found in the captain's quarters," Usopp announced proudly. Clack! Usopp! Next time you want us to look at the ship's cannon, do not point it at us. Usopp rubbed his head and looked at his seething shipmates. Or, don't be like that. This thing is not even loaded, see? Kaboom! The smell of gunpowder, a deafening noise, and falling onto the floor when the cannon wheeled backward from the blast told him otherwise. The cannonball skimmed across the ocean, hitting a small spit of land and blowing a rock formation to pieces. "Oh, my head," Usopp groaned, once again rubbing the back of his skull gently after Nami hit him again. Nami turned to Luffy. "What crew member do we need next?" she asked. "We need a cook," grumbled Zoro while seated in the corner, feeling too cool to sit at the table like a normal person. "Yeah. Someone who can tell at a glance what we can and cannot eat out on the ocean, and how to prepare it safely. A cook is almost as important as a navigator on long voyages." Luffy agreed with Zoro's and Nami's reasoning. Luffy had promised her the night before that they would deal with Arlong after they got another crew member. Nami was fine with that, she still had time left to pay her quota. Later. "Come out and face me," a deep masculine voice yelled from outside on the deck. Luffy was on his feet in an instant, rushing out the door to see a guy with a sword scar across his left cheek, waving a thick saber about and wrecking whatever he could see. "Hey! Who the hell do you think you are, tearing up my ship?" Luffy asked angrily. The man sneered, his glare visible even behind his sunglasses. "It does not matter who I am. There is no point in telling someone who I am going to kill." He charged at Luffy with his blade held over his head to cleave the boy in half. It was all too easy for Luffy to simply step aside as the sword swung down, then bring his fist up casually to deliver a tremendous gut punch to his attacker. The blow made the swordsman cough up a small amount of blood before falling limp against Luffy's arm. "I did not ask who you are because I really do not care. But I will not stand for guys like you jumping onto Merry and trying to wreck it." He tossed the attacker toward the cabin wall. A loud thud rang out when he hit the timber, followed by him sliding down and sitting on the floor. "Johnny!" Zoro exclaimed at the sight as he stepped out of the cabin. The downed man, despite seconds before being tossed around like a rag doll, was back on his feet in an instant at the sound of the familiar voice, surprise and relief filling his face. "Zoro, my brother!" "What? Zoro has a brother?" The captain of the ship was quite surprised. "Relax, Luffy. It is just a phrase swordsmen use with each other," Zoro explained before turning back to his old friend. He looked around a little first, then asked something that was nagging at him. "Hey, where is Yosaku? Usually you two are harder to separate than white on rice." Johnny started tearing up, every hole on his face running like a river. "Brother, it is horrible. Yosaku is, he is." "Is what?" "Dying." Another man was sprawled out across the deck, looking as though he had dropped dead on the spot. He wore a long coat, checkered shorts, and a black shirt that was covered in fresh bloodstains, along with a head wrap on his shaved head. "This came upon him all at once," said Johnny. "One minute he was fine, then bam, he collapsed. His teeth started falling out like they were held in with old gum, his wounds reopened, and he could barely move. He was too sick to be moved, so I pulled up on that little spit of land over there. That is, until you decided to shoot a cannon at us." Usopp felt guilty and looked down in shame. "Sorry." "You are completely forgiven," Johnny said instantly. "Well, that was easy," Nami commented dryly. "What was the point of being mad if you forgive that quickly? What is the point in getting angry?" "My brother is going to die anyway," Johnny said, wiping his eyes. "My brother and I have been traveling the East Blue for years, picking off small-time bounties and ending a few reigns of terror before they even really start." Sure, we are not among the greats, but we have managed to make a name for ourselves. He snorted and bit back his tears. But that is all over now. My brother and all we accomplished together are going to die right here. You idiot! The men turned to see Nomi march up to Yosaku's down form, poking and prodding him and lifting his lip to check his mouth like a horse. Nomi! Zoro exclaimed. Show some respect for the almost dead, added Usopp. Usopp, she snapped at him. Go into the galley with Zoro, juice about a dozen limes, and bring it back here. The two just looked at her in confusion. Go. The second command got the required response. The two raced up the stairs and into the ship's kitchen, returning a minute later with a tankard of lime juice, which Nomi instructed them to make the sick man drink. Looks like you are lucky we shot at you. Otherwise, you never would have come aboard, and your friend would have succumbed to scurvy, smirked the navigator, trying not to laugh at the fact that if her newest nakama had not almost blown them up, one of them would be dead for sure. Scurvy? That sounds familiar, Johnny said, rubbing his chin, trying to remember where he had heard that before. Nomi nodded. It should. Scurvy used to be about as common as a sunburn for sailors. You get it if you do not get enough fruits and vegetables in your diet, which used to cause problems since people did not have proper techniques to preserve them for longer voyages. Nowadays, only people going on short trips or the brain-dead travel without any fruit or vegetables. Would you believe we were doing the first one? No, I would not. Nuts. Johnny was impressed. Wow. So you are a doctor? Nomi looked at him like he was stupid. This is not doctoring. Practically anyone who ever goes sailing has to know this. Were you never taught that? Suddenly, there was a rustle beneath them. Before they had time to react, the dying man at their feet jumped up and embraced his friend in a tight hug. I am completely healed, cheered Yosaku, waving his arms about merrily while giving everyone a big, goofy, completely intact smile, causing the straw hats to wonder if he had eaten some sort of healing devil fruit, before collapsing back to the floor unconscious with blood pouring out of his mouth. Nomi turned to her shipmates. What did we learn today? Always prepare for long voyages, said Usopp. Do not think that you will be healed immediately after being cured, guessed Zoro. To never underestimate the sea, Luffy said. Good enough. Eventually, the talk came back to cooking, with Luffy stating that they needed someone who also wanted to be on the sea for a long time and be a pirate. Can't be just anyone either, said Zoro while leaning against the mast. If he is coming aboard this ship, then he cannot just cook. He has to be able to defend himself at least. Johnny, who was busy tending to the still recovering Yosaku, perked up at the description. Brother, I know of such a chef. Zoro and the rest turned to him. You do? Johnny nodded. Yeah. But getting him to join might be a real pain. Luffy just grinned in response. So he will fit right in then. Just tell us where to go. After 2 days, the new people on the ship soon found out that Captain Luffy was a slave driver. At 7 in the morning, the whole crew was awake, first eating breakfast before Luffy started training them as if there were no tomorrow, with Usopp being tired within an hour after they started. Right now, the crew was just resting before a ship soon came into view. It was not exactly a fish. It was a fairly large ship with a big fish head for the figurehead and a large fish tail for the rudder. It had 2 masts with their sails furled up, and from what the crew could see, several anchors, since the boat barely rocked against the waves. They could tell that the ship obviously was not built for speed, since it was almost completely round and about as aerodynamic as a brick. I am not kidding, Johnny huffed. This is the Barati. The Barati? As in the famous ocean-going 5-star restaurant? I hear that this place has the best and most exotic food outside of the Grand Line, and you don't even need to book a table since not everyone can get to it, exclaimed the giddy Nomi, who, after so long of eating only the basics, was ready for some civilized cuisine. Suddenly a deafening roar came out of nowhere, rocking the ship. Meat, the Storm Boy moaned loudly, visions of foods the likes of which he had never tasted filling his vision. Zoro sighed and grasped the back of his captain's shirt. We better hurry inside before he freaks out everyone in the restaurant. Yeah, right, brother. I remember your face when I told you he often comes here, Yosaku snidely remarked, coughing a little as he still was not 100%. Zoro grinned in a manner that sent a chill up everyone's spine, except for the hungry captain. Of course, that did nothing to match the absolute terror they felt when a massive thunderclap echoed through the air, and the ocean right next to the Merry exploded, causing the small ship to rock harshly. Usopp landed on his rear, while Zoro unintentionally let go of Luffy in surprise as Luffy grabbed Nami so she would not fall. Pirate scum! Surrender or die, a male voice shouted out past the water spout the explosion made. It was a marine vessel, all right. The ugly zebra stripe pattern it had and the word Marines in big, bold letters painted across the sail left no one wondering about that. Wait, I don't recognize your Jolly Roger, the voice said again, coming from an impeccably dressed man aboard the marine ship. He was a fairly tall man, reasonably well built, showing he could probably hold his own in a fight if he were not afraid of getting his purple and black pinstripe suit ruined. His pink hair was combed back and parted at either side of his rather average face. On his fists, however, were a pair of unusual knuckle dusters. Instead of a smooth design, the screw head sat over each of them. Well, well, well. If you don't look like a bunch of kids playing pretend on your daddy's boat, the man taunted. I am Lieutenant Iron Fist Full Body of the Marines. And who might you brats be? Are you really pirates, or just pretending? We are the Straw Hat Pirates. We just made our Roger 2 days ago, Luffy stated, standing in front of his crew. Oh? Who is the captain? Full Body asked, scanning the crew. I am the captain, Luffy stated. He noticed Usopp from the corner of his eye, slightly moving forward and ready to raise his hand to say something, but Luffy sent a subtle wave of Conqueror's Haki at him. This caused Usopp to stumble, shaking in fear. Luffy knew it was all fun and games within the crew, but Usopp needed to realize that it was another thing entirely when standing in front of strangers, especially Marines or rival pirate crews. The Marine focused on Zoro briefly before stopping on Johnny and Yosaku. You two are those low-rank bounty hunters. Jamie and Kosaku or something, right? Johnny narrowed his eyes behind his glasses. That is Johnny and Yosaku. Oh, as if it matters, Full Body smirked. From the look of it, you two were kidnapped by these no-name rookies. That is kind of sad, because I don't think even the weakest of crews would waste their time recruiting a couple of idiots who have never claimed a bounty past a few million. Pardon? Johnny said, holding a hand to his ear. Brother, I think this 2-bit Marine just insulted us, he said in a mocking tone. Yosaku took a drag on his cigarette and nodded, bringing his hand up to take the cigarette and discreetly cough up a bit of blood. Yeah. We can't let some colorblind idiot tarnish our good name. Without a second thought, they drew their swords and charged at Full Body, jumping over the Merry side and directly onto the marine vessel. Get ready, you marine peacock. Without flinching, Full Body brought his metal-knuckled right fist up to block against Johnny's swords, smashing through the blade like plaster and ramming his fist right between the bounty hunter's eyes. His unguarded fist corkscrewed, deflecting Yosaku's sword away and catching him square in the solar plexus. The two dropped like weights. The Marine picked them up and, with minimal effort, flung them back onto Luffy's ship face first. A Marine's rank reflects his power, just like a bounty reflects a pirate. You two couldn't make it past Ensign or break 1,000,000 berry as you are. Know your limits, he sneered. Full Body. A female voice came from inside the Marine ship cabin just before the door opened, and a pair of thin arms reached out to grasp his. Come on, quit picking on those kids. You know the Barity doesn't hold tables if we are late. He looked into the cabin and smiled. Fine. He turned back to the Straw Hats. Today is my day off, and this ship isn't outfitted for capturing scum like you, so I will leave for now. But if I see you out there again, you are mine. With that, the Marine ship began to sail away. Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp stared after the ship while Nami knelt down beside Yosako to check his injuries. Back on his ship, Full Body stepped out of the cabin, covered in lipstick marks, and turned to an ensign keeping an eye on the pirate ship. "Let us nip this in the bud." "Aye, sir," the Marine said, lighting the cannon and sending a round shell at them with a loud explosion. Full Body watched in near slow motion as the cannonball went rocketing toward the crew, glad he was stopping a threat before it could even begin. He was going to enjoy this, or at least, that is what he thought until the cannonball was stopped right before hitting the ship. "Luffy! They are going to fire on us!" Usopp screamed. Following his first instinct, Usopp jumped so the explosion would carry him to safety. Of course, the ship had not actually been hit, so instead, he just crashed face first beside Johnny. Just as the cannonball was fired, Luffy jumped onto the bulwark, catching the heavy iron ball right in his hands. The bounty hunters and Usopp stared with their jaws dropping to their knees. Nami just smirked, finding that she quite enjoyed seeing Luffy display his strength. Zoro was more annoyed than anything that he had not had the chance to see if he could split the cannonball in two before it exploded. Full Body, on the other hand, was furious. Luffy grinned as he tossed the cannonball between his hands as if it were a mere toy. "Do you want this back?" he asked innocently. He hurled it back. It collided with the Marine who had fired the cannon, sending him crashing hard into the captain's cabin, cracking the wood upon impact. Back on the Going Merry, Usopp pulled his jaw back up and stared after the Marine vessel. He made a mental note never to be surprised by whatever his captain did again. Soon, the pirate crew walked inside the restaurant. It looked impressive, and Luffy could not wait to eat. They chose a table. Luffy and Nami sat close to each other, his arm wrapped gently around her waist. Usopp looked shocked, not having realized the two were together, while Zoro simply raised an eyebrow and shrugged. A blonde chef suddenly walked over to their table, his eyes practically turning into hearts the moment he set sight on Nami. Nami immediately knew she could play this kind of person like a fiddle. "The sea has brought such a beautiful woman into our restaurant. What can I serve you, my lady?" The blonde spoke with a flourish, bowing slightly to Nami, who began acting thoroughly impressed. Luffy simply rolled his eyes playfully. "Oh, thank you for the compliment. I like everything on the menu, but it is all quite expensive," Nami said, playing the innocent girl masterfully. Zoro muttered, which under his breath. Sanji had heart eyes, practically drooling. "There is no need to pay for such a beautiful lady as yourself. There is no price for you. We are grateful just to have you here," Sanji stated, turning away to prepare the dishes. Luffy smiled, kissing Nami on the cheek, which she thoroughly enjoyed. The crew noticed their captain and his date acting quite smugly. Sitting across from a beautiful woman and about to eat the most delicious food in all the seas, surrounded by the admiring, hushed whispers of the other patrons, this was how life should be. At a nearby table, a waiter arrived in just a few short minutes. He poured wine for Lieutenant Full Body and his date while balancing their food in his other hand and on his head. Full Body picked up his glass and sniffed it, catching the eye of his date. He took a delicate sip of the wine and swirled it in his mouth gently before swallowing. "Ah, a delicate bouquet from North Mikuo. I would know that rare taste anywhere. A wine that is dry, full-bodied, and slightly acidic such as this could only be a Würzburger Stein. Right, waiter." He basked in the sounds of amazement at his wine-tasting skills. "Completely wrong, sir." Full Body coughed and glared at the man. "North Mikuo does not make red wine. And I don't know what you think full-bodied or dry means either, but this wine certainly isn't either," the chef smiled without dropping his cigarette. "And I am the assistant chef, Sanji, not a waiter." Sanji was tall, thin, and dressed in a black double-breasted suit jacket, a blue striped shirt, and a black tie. He had bright blonde hair combed over his left eye, with distinctive swirling eyebrows. He set down the soup in front of the giggling woman and the livid Marine. The admiration from the dining room turned into mocking laughter. The Marine had been made into a laughingstock. He had paid extra to have that scenario set up to impress his date. How dare this punk humiliate him? Full Body took something from his pocket and discreetly dropped it into his food, a prank toy he had confiscated from one of his men. Hey! What is the big idea? He bellowed just as Sanji turned to leave. Is there a problem, sir? The lieutenant snorted. You are darn right there is. Do you mind telling me what a fly is doing in my soup? Sanji looked down at the offending bowl, seeing a small fly floating in the creamy broth. Looks like it is doing the backstroke to me. The tittering and whispers turned into full-blown guffaws as the Marine was completely humiliated. Now, if you will excuse me, I... Crash! The offending bowl, along with the hardwood table it was sitting on, shattered into pieces when a metal-covered fist came crashing down. Crystal and cutlery flew everywhere. People stopped dining as chefs ran into the restaurant from the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. Who the hell do you think you are dealing with? Full Body snarled, standing up and glaring at the assistant chef. I am Iron Fist Full Body of the Marines. Not some run-of-the-mill nobody you can mess with. The charming humor drained from Sanji's face. He knelt down at the broken table and looked at the broken, empty bowls, their contents spilled and ruined. If you had just taken out that rubber fly you put in, you could have eaten the soup, Sanji said flatly, causing the surrounding whispers to intensify. I am a customer, you lousy waiter. Full Body retorted. That means I paid you to treat me like royalty, not a court jester. The watching chefs paled considerably. Sanji, don't. Sanji stood up to his full height, standing slightly taller than the Marine, and glared him down with his single visible eye. Is that right? And I suppose you think money gives you the right to act like an idiot. Listen to me. Full Body shouted. The next second, the pink-haired, purple-suited Marine was held up in the air by his jaw by the angry chef. The first and only rule of the Bharati, Sanji said with a dangerous edge to his voice, is don't waste food. Full Body could not help but gulp in fear. This really was not his day. He felt himself flying through the air, crashing onto the floor and knocking his head against the back of a table. Sanji! What the hell do you think you are doing? Patty was the grill chef of the ship, in charge of cooking burger patties, steaks, and chops. Patty grabbed Sanji by the wrist, being careful not to touch his hands, and glared at him. You idiot! The number one rule of this establishment is that the customer is king. They are the lifeblood of the business. So why, pray tell, is his lifeblood leaking out onto the floor? Sanji pulled his arm out of the cook's grip and shrugged. He wasted food. The larger cook gripped the sides of his head. Ugh! What is it with you and food? You are going to get us shut down one day, you idiot. Yeah, like today. Full Body groaned, pulling himself up. I am going to make sure this madhouse is shut down, and this lousy waiter is put away for a long time. Not if I send you away first, Sanji said calmly, earning a horrified look from Full Body and a gasp from almost everyone else. Luffy watched with interest, thoroughly impressed by the blonde. Zoro caught onto what Luffy was thinking and prayed he would not pick this pervert as their cook. The other chefs rushed the blonde, grabbing him to stop their comrade from making a bigger mistake than he already had. Chef Zeph, a little help, said one of the cooks restraining Sanji. Zeph's reaction was immediate. His peg leg lashed out, catching the young chef where his neck met his shoulder and sending him to the floor. Are you trying to make US go under, you eggplant? Well, at least you know how to discipline your staff. Not that it is going to make me reconsider shutting you down, chuckled Full Body while pulling himself up, only to be sent right back to the floor by an angry Zeph. Are you insane? Do you know who I am? Groaned the Marine, trying once more to pick himself up. Zeph was the owner and head chef of the Bharati. In his youth, he had been a tall and imposing figure, and while age had taken some of his height, it had left all of his intimidation intact. The head chef snorted. Yeah. You are the lousy punk who thinks he can shut me down. Feel free to try. I will leave a job as a dishwasher open for you when you get laughed out of the Marines. Full Body stared at the elder man with wide eyes. Was this really the place everyone praised? Were these guys even real cooks? Just as he was thinking about the absurdity of the situation, the entrance flung open, and a Marine ran inside, bleeding and gasping. Lieutenant Full Body. He escaped, the Marine declared. That Krieg pirate we caught a few days ago busted out of the holding cell and beat the whole crew. The Marine's chest exploded as a bullet passed through him, causing the man to fall to his knees and collapse onto the floor. How did he escape? We haven't fed him. How? The Marine gasped before going still. The door swung fully open, and everyone turned to see the new arrival. He was thin, almost unhealthily so, with dark bags under his eyes. He wore a jacket with a serpent design on the back over a tattered shirt and pants. He looked as though he had been through hell. In one hand, he held a smoking pistol. Silence reigned over the restaurant. The man walked over to an empty table and sat down, kicking his feet up. He spoke, his voice a dry rasp. I don't care what it is. Just get me something to eat. An uneasy murmuring broke out among the patrons, anxious over the aura of danger around the man. The straw hats watched closely, noticing immediately that the man was starving. Patty stepped forward, a fake, forced smile on his face. Do you have any money to pay for your meal? The starving man aimed his pistol directly at Patty's head. Do you take steel? He asked, clearly used to intimidation. Patty's smile turned into a sneer in an instant. With no warning, he swept the chair out from under the pirate. As the starving man fell, Patty whirled the heavy chair above his head and brought it crashing down onto the man's back. Luffy did not like what he saw, but he was curious to see what Sanji would do. Zeph muttered under his breath, Patty, you continue to disappoint me, before returning toward the kitchen. Sanji disappeared shortly after, leaving the patrons with much less of an appetite. Luffy stepped outside the restaurant to check on the situation. To his mild surprise, Sanji was already outside, setting a steaming plate of food right in front of the starving pirate. The man seemed shocked by the display of kindness, while Sanji merely leaned against the railing and lit a cigarette. Hey! Eat it! You must be starving. The man began to tear up as the aroma hit his nose, but he turned his head away. This is worse than being kicked out. I won't accept pity. My pride as a man and a pirate won't let me. Take it away. Sanji merely repeated his command softly. The pirate broke down and began devouring the food like a starving animal. As he ate, tears flowed freely down his face. Delicious. It is so delicious. I have never had anything this good, he sobbed through a full mouth. Sanji simply gritted his teeth and grinned. Luffy sat on the railing beside Sanji. You are a pretty nice guy, feeding him even though he can't pay. You are pretty strong, too. Why don't you join my crew? Sanji looked up at Luffy incredulously, while Luffy simply waited. He had made his offer, he would wait for an answer, and if it were a no, he would keep asking until it became a yes. Not a chance. You seem interesting, but death itself couldn't drag me away from this restaurant. That old fart needs me, whether he admits it or not. Besides, I have no interest in being a pirate. Sanji blew a puff of smoke into the air. The pirate, now full, turned to face Luffy. You are a pirate, aren't you? Luffy nodded. Where are you headed? The Grand Line. Sanji raised an eyebrow, but the starving man seemed to choke in shock. Take that back. You don't want to go there. You can't imagine the horrors in that wretched ocean. No. I am going to become the Pirate King, and I will never stop until I achieve my dream. Meanwhile, at Marine headquarters, Vice Admiral Garp was very busy. He was sweating, struggling, and on the brink of defeat. Breathing heavily, he narrowed his eyes at his target. You will not defeat me, Garp declared loudly. He then ate his 809th donut, enjoying it immensely as he attempted to break the world record for the most donuts eaten in an hour. The record was currently held by a pirate from Big Mom's crew. Garp had forgotten his name, but did not bother trying to remember it. As he prepared to eat another, the door swung open. Walking inside was his oldest friend, Fleet Admiral Sengo, who looked furious. "What now?" Garp asked, bored, knowing he would have to pause his battle with the donuts. "We have another dangerous rookie," Sengo stated, slamming a stack of wanted posters onto the desk. This caught Garp's attention, wondering if Luffy had already made a name for himself, though it seemed a bit early for that. "Who?" Garp asked curiously. "Port Gas D Ace," Sengo stated gravely. On the outside, Garp maintained a calm face, but on the inside, he was grinning like a madman. What is so special about him? What did he do to piss off the Marines? Garp asked in an uncaring tone, picking his nose. "Not just the Marines. The world government," Sengo stated. Garp stopped what he was doing upon hearing that. The world government? Did they find out? No, that could not be it. If they had, the poster would say Gold D Ace. What did he do? Garp asked with genuine interest. Sengo turned to his old friend and explained the situation. By the end of the explanation, Garp looked shocked, but not for the reason Sengo thought. "That is my grandson," Garp thought to himself as he looked down at the brand new wanted poster. Wanted, dead or alive. Port Gas D's Lace. 956,480,000 berry.